My sister-in-law slapped my hand at my own 10th anniversary dinner just because I reached for an appetizer. She looked me dead in the eye and told me I had forgotten my place in the family. My husband of 10 years, my so-called partner in life, just stared at his phone and whispered for me to keep the peace. I did not keep the peace. I set down my fork, stood up, and slapped her right back. Then I took my children, paid only for our food, and walked out, leaving them with a massive bill they could not pay. What they did not realize was that physical slap was just the beginning. The real devastation was what I was about to do to their bank accounts. I had spent months meticulously planning my 10th anniversary dinner. The venue was one of the most exclusive steakhouses in Buckhead, Atlanta, a place where the chandeliers sparkled like crushed ice, and the waitstaff anticipated your needs before you even realized you had them. I booked the private dining room. I coordinated the floral arrangements. I selected the vintage wines. And of course, I paid the deposit with my own credit card. My husband Terrence had offered nothing but complaints about the parking situation when we arrived. He was a man obsessed with his image, wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than our monthly mortgage while contributing absolutely nothing to the actual effort of celebrating our marriage. I am a senior forensic accountant for a major corporate firm. My days consist of 60-hour work weeks analyzing complex financial data, tracing hidden assets, and unraveling corporate fraud. I am brilliant at what I do, but I am inherently low profile. I do not wear flashy designer labels or seek out the spotlight. I prefer quiet competence. This fundamentally clashed with Terrence and his entire family. They are the kind of people who lease luxury vehicles they cannot afford just to impress people they do not even like. When we sat down at the sprawling mahogany table, I was already exhausted. My son Malik, who is 12, and my daughter Aliyah, who is 9, were seated quietly next to me. They were well-behaved and respectful, completely unbothered by the stiff, formal atmosphere. Across from me sat Terrence, looking at his reflection in his phone screen. To his left sat his brother Andre and Andre's wife Brittany. To his right sat my mother-in-law Beatrice. Brittany is a white woman who married into our African-American family 5 years ago, and Beatrice treats her like she is the ultimate prize. Beatrice is a woman suffocated by her own classism and internalized issues, constantly seeking proximity to what she perceives as high society. She excuses every microaggression Brittany performs, labeling it as proper etiquette or refined culture. Meanwhile, Beatrice treats me, the dark-skinned woman who actually funds their lifestyle, like the hired help. The evening was already tense. Brittany had spent the first 30 minutes making backhanded compliments about my dress, suggesting the color was a bit harsh for my complexion. She ordered the most expensive champagne on the menu without looking at the prices, fully aware that I was hosting the dinner. Andre, who considers himself the mastermind of their family logistics business, swirled his glass and bragged loudly about contracts he had not actually secured yet. When the first course arrived, a massive tiered seafood tower featuring lobster, oysters, and colossal crab claws. My stomach rumbled. I had skipped lunch to finalize a corporate audit report for a client, and I was genuinely starving. As the waiter set the beautiful silver platter in the center of the table, I reached out to take a crab claw. It was a simple, natural movement. I was the host. I was the one paying. It was my anniversary. Before my fingers could even graze the silver tongs, a sharp, stinging pain exploded across the back of my hand. The smack echoed in the private dining room, loud enough to make the waiter freeze in his tracks. I pulled my hand back in pure shock. A red mark was already blooming across my dark skin. I looked across the table. Brittany had leaned entirely out of her chair, her arm extended, her face twisted in a mask of arrogant superiority. "You forget your place in this family, Zuri," she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "Guests of honor and your elders eat first." The sheer audacity of her words left me momentarily paralyzed. I looked around the table, expecting someone, anyone, to correct her, to defend me, to point out the absolute insanity of what had just occurred. Instead, I found a horrifying echo chamber of approval. Beatrice took a slow, deliberate sip of her water and nodded. "Brittany is right, Zuri," Beatrice said, her tone cool and dismissing. "Proper etiquette requires a host to wait. You have always struggled with these finer social graces. We are trying to elevate this family, and you constantly drag us back down with these unrefined habits. I stared at my mother-in-law, unable to comprehend the level of delusion required to speak to me that way. Elevate the family, I thought. The only thing keeping their precious family logistics firm afloat was my money. Beatrice was not finished. You really should be more grateful, she continued, ignoring the red welt on my hand. Terence and Andre graciously allow you to be part of their success. You should show more respect to the people building a legacy. That little bit of premarital savings you contributed barely kept the lights on when they started. You act like you own the place, but you are just riding their coattails. The historical revisionism was breathtaking. My premarital savings did not just keep the lights on. My money bought their first fleet of delivery trucks. My financial structuring saved them from bankruptcy 3 separate times. My credit scores secured their commercial leases. I was the invisible backbone of their entire operation, but because I did not fit Beatrice's aesthetic vision for the family, I was treated like a nuisance. I turned my eyes to my husband, the man I had shared a bed with for 10 years, the father of my children. Terence was staring intently at the tablecloth. He looked visibly uncomfortable but not angry. He did not look at my bruised hand. He did not look at Brittany. He leaned slightly toward me, and under the cover of the ambient restaurant noise, he muttered his betrayal. Zuri, please just keep the peace so we do not look ghetto in front of everybody. That was the exact moment 10 years of marriage evaporated into thin air. Something deep inside my chest clicked perfectly into place. It was not a hot, explosive rage. It was a cold, calculating clarity. I had spent a decade shrinking myself to make these arrogant, incompetent people feel massive. I had swallowed my pride, ignored their insults, and funded their delusions, all in the name of keeping the family together for Malik and Aliyah. But looking at my children, whose wide eyes were darting between my bruised hand and their father's bowed head, I realized I was teaching them the worst lesson possible. I was teaching them how to be victims. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or offer an emotional argument. I picked up my thick linen napkin and slowly wiped my mouth. I placed the napkin neatly on the table. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The room was deathly quiet. Brittany looked up at me, a smug, victorious smile playing on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought I was going to apologize or run to the bathroom to cry. I leaned across the seafood tower, bringing my face inches from hers. Her smile faltered just a fraction of a second before my right hand connected with her cheek. The slap I delivered was not a polite correction. It was a perfectly executed strike fueled by 10 years of suppressed resentment. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Brittany's head whipped to the side and her chair tipped backwards, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She gasped, clutching her face as bright red color flooded her pale skin. Chaos erupted instantly. Andre jumped up from his chair, shouting and pointing his finger at me. Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls and yelling about violence and disgrace. Terence finally found his voice, jumping to his feet and demanding to know what was wrong with me. I ignored all of them. I looked down at Malik and Aliyah. "Get your coats, kids," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "We are leaving." My children grabbed their jackets without a word, clearly sensing the absolute finality in my tone. I did not look back at the table. I walked directly out of the private dining room and approached the maitre d', who was standing near the main entrance looking highly concerned. I pulled out my credit card. "I will be paying for the 2 children's meals and my own undisturbed appetizer," I told him politely. "The rest of the party in the private room will be handling their own bill. Please ensure they cover the 2 bottles of vintage champagne they already opened." I signed the receipt, tipped him generously, and walked out the front doors into the cool Atlanta evening. As we waited for the valet to bring my car, I felt a profound sense of liberation. I had left them sitting in an exclusive restaurant with a tab that easily exceeded $2,500. I knew for an absolute fact that Terence had left his wallet in my car console, complaining earlier that it ruined the lines of his tailored suit. I knew Andre's business credit cards were currently maxed out because I had seen the ledger that very morning. And I knew Beatrice never carried anything more than a decorative clutch to these dinners. The drive home was quiet. The kids were safe in the back seat processing the evening. Malik leaned forward and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror and smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. I am better than okay, sweetie, I promised him. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a text message from Terrence. I did not need to open it to read the preview banner. You have ruined us. The restaurant management is threatening to call the police because we cannot cover the bill. I am locking the joint accounts until you learn respect and apologize to Brittany. You are out of your mind. I read the words and let out a soft laugh. Terrence thought freezing our joint checking account was a masterstroke of control. He thought taking away my access to our daily spending money would bring me to my knees begging for forgiveness. He truly believed he held the power. He had completely forgotten who he was married to. I parked the car in our driveway, ushered the kids inside, and went straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and unlocked my secure banking applications. I did not care about the joint accounts. What Terrence did not realize was that physical slap in the restaurant was just the opening act. The real devastation was what I was about to do to their precious family business. I was a corporate forensic accountant, and for the past 6 months, I had maintained unrestricted back-end access to the logistics company's financial servers. They wanted me to remember my place. They were about to find out exactly where my place was. My husband drained $45,000 from our joint account overnight and gave it to his mother, all because I refused to apologize for defending myself against his sister-in-law. He thought freezing my money would bring me to my knees begging for forgiveness. He had no idea that I already had back-end access to his entire corporate financial server, and I was about to uncover $1 million secret that would send his precious family to federal prison. I am Zuri, 35 years old, and I spent a decade shrinking myself to fit into a family that viewed me as nothing more than a highly educated ATM. Before I reveal exactly how I dismantled their high society facade piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic in-laws exactly who they are dealing with. The morning after the disastrous anniversary dinner, I woke up early. The house was dead quiet. Terrence had not come home, which was exactly what I expected. When his fragile ego was bruised, he ran straight to his mother Beatrice for validation and comfort. I got Malik and Aliyah ready for school, moving through my morning routine with practiced efficiency. I made them pancakes, packed their lunches, and kissed their foreheads as they boarded the yellow school bus at the end of our street. I needed to get to the office early to finish a massive forensic audit for a corporate client, so I pulled into the premium gas station down the street to fill up my car. The morning air was crisp, and despite the drama of the previous night, I felt a strange, lingering peace. I had finally stood up for myself. But as I swiped my debit card at the pump, the small digital screen flashed a message that made my blood run cold. Card declined. I frowned and tried inserting the chip. Declined again. I pulled out my phone and quickly logged into the mobile banking app for the joint checking account I shared with Terrence. The balance, which had comfortably sat at just over $45,000 the afternoon prior, now read $0.12. I stared at the glowing screen while the digital numbers blurred for a second. Terrence had not been making an empty threat when he texted me after I left the restaurant. He had actually done it. I clicked on the Recent Transactions tab to see exactly what had happened. A massive wire transfer had been initiated at 2 in the morning. The destination account belonged to Beatrice. My husband had literally taken my hard-earned money and handed it over to his mother to hold hostage. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my throat. I stood there at the gas pump holding a completely useless piece of plastic, realizing the absolute absurdity of his strategy. Terrence knew I made excellent money as a corporate forensic accountant, but he always assumed he controlled the narrative because his name was plastered on the side of the family logistics company. He thought that by cutting off my immediate cash flow, I would panic and crumble. I simply reached into my wallet, pulled out my personal corporate credit card, an account Terrence knew absolutely nothing about, and paid for my gas. I was not going to let his petty financial abuse ruin my morning. I was merging onto the highway when my phone rang through the car speakers. The caller ID displayed Beatrice. I took a deep breath, letting the ringing fill the car for a moment before I tapped the steering wheel to answer. Zuri, I hope you have had time to reflect on your disgraceful behavior last night. Beatrice began without any greeting. Her voice dripped with that fake honeyed southern charm she weaponized against anyone she deemed beneath her. I kept my eyes on the road. I slept perfectly fine, Beatrice. I cannot say the same for your son, since he is apparently hiding at your house. Terence is highly distressed. Beatrice snapped the fake charm, instantly evaporating into sharp hostility. He is deeply embarrassed by the ghetto-violent display you put on in front of our family and the restaurant staff. Brittany is traumatized. You assaulted her unprovoked. She slapped my hand because I reached for a crab claw, I stated, keeping my tone aggressively level. I defended myself. If Brittany is traumatized, she should learn to keep her hands to herself. You are completely unhinged, Beatrice scoffed. This is exactly what I warned Terence about when he wanted to marry someone from your background. You have no class, Zuri. You do not understand high society etiquette. Brittany was simply reminding you of your place, and you reacted like an animal. Now Terence has transferred the household funds to me for safekeeping. You will not see a single dime of that money until you issue a formal public apology to Brittany and to this entire family. I listened to the hum of the tires against the asphalt, letting her arrogant words hang in the heavy air. She actually believed she was putting me in my place. She thought she was the matriarch of some powerful dynasty disciplining a rebellious, disobedient servant. That is my money, Beatrice, I said quietly. A large portion of those funds came from my recent quarterly bonus. You and Terence are playing a very dangerous game with my finances. It is family money, Beatrice corrected sharply. And without this family, you are nothing, Zuri. Do not forget who puts a roof over your head. Terence and Andre built a massive logistics empire. They are pillars of the Atlanta business community. You are just a number cruncher sitting in a cubicle. The only reason you have any lifestyle at all is because my son graciously allows you to share his success. You should be down on your knees thanking God that we let you into this family. The historical revisionism was so profound, it bordered on actual clinical delusion. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning lighter against the leather. Beatrice had somehow completely erased the reality of our past. When Terence and Andre wanted to start that logistics firm 10 years ago, no bank in the state would give them a business loan. Their credit was terrible, and they had absolutely no collateral. It was my premarital savings, my carefully hoarded $60,000 that bought their first 3 delivery trucks. It was my financial structuring that kept them from going bankrupt during their first 2 years of operation. I built the foundation of the very empire she was now using to look down on me. Are you going to apologize, Zuri? She demanded, breaking into my thoughts. Because if you do not, Terence is prepared to take this much further. He will cancel your credit cards. He will stop paying the mortgage on that house. We will freeze you out until you learn how to behave like a proper, respectable wife. I let out a slow, measured breath. Beatrice, I want you to remember this exact conversation, I told her, my voice dangerously calm. I want you to remember that you told me I was nothing without your family. Is that a threat? She laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that grated against my ears. You are in no position to make threats, little girl. Call me back when you are ready to apologize. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me in silence. I pulled into the parking garage of my office building, put the car in park, and sat in the quiet isolation of my vehicle. The sheer entitlement of these people was breathtaking. They truly believed they had me trapped in a corner. They thought taking away $45,000 would cripple me and force my submission. They did not know that as a senior auditor, I maintained a private high-yield trust fund that currently held over $200,000. I had set it up years ago precisely because I saw how reckless Terence was becoming with his personal spending and his desperate need to project wealth. The frozen joint account was an inconvenience, but it was far from a tragedy. But it was the principle of the matter that ignited a cold, focused fire in my chest. They wanted to use my own money to punish me. They wanted to hold my family finances hostage to force me to bow down to a woman who had physically assaulted me in public. They believed their logistics company made them untouchable kings of Atlanta. What Terence and Beatrice and Andre did not realize was that I still had back-end administrative access to their entire corporate financial system. I had set it up 6 months prior when Andre begged me to help them prepare for a messy corporate tax audit. They were so technologically illiterate and lazy that they never learned how to revoke my access credentials after the audit was filed. I grabbed my briefcase, opened my car door, and walked toward the elevator, riding it up to my floor with a new sense of purpose. The anger I felt was being slowly replaced by an icy, hyper-focused determination. They wanted to play games with my checking account. I was going to rip their entire fraudulent empire down to the studs and expose every single dirty secret they had been hiding. I pulled my car into the secure parking garage of my corporate office building. I parked in my assigned spot, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet isolation of my vehicle for a moment. Terrence and his family thought they had me trapped in a corner. They thought taking away $45,000 would cripple me and force my submission. They believed their logistics company made them untouchable kings of Atlanta. They did not know that as a senior auditor, I maintained a private high-yield trust fund that currently held over $200,000. I had set it up years ago precisely because I saw how reckless Terrence was becoming with his personal spending and his desperate need to project wealth. The frozen joint account was a minor inconvenience, but it was far from a tragedy. It was the principle of the matter that ignited a cold, focused fire in my chest. They wanted to use my own money to punish me. They wanted to hold my family finances hostage, to force me to bow down to a white woman who had physically assaulted me in public. Beatrice, Andre, and Terrence truly believed they were the masterminds of our family dynamic. But I was the one with the keys to their entire kingdom. I grabbed my briefcase, opened my car door, and walked toward the elevators, riding up to my floor with a new sense of purpose. The anger I felt was being slowly replaced by an icy, hyper-focused determination. They wanted to play games with my checking account. I was going to rip their entire fraudulent empire down to the studs and expose every single dirty secret they had been hiding. I walked into my private office, locked the door behind me, and set my briefcase on the floor. I booted up my primary workstation, letting the triple monitors glow to life and illuminate the dark wood of my desk. I did not even open my daily corporate assignments. My only priority was the logistics company my husband and his brother claimed to have built with their own bare hands. I launched my secure virtual private network and entered the administrative credentials Andre had given me 6 months prior. The system let me right in. They had not changed a single password or updated a single security protocol. I navigated directly to the master ledger to track the $45,000 Terrence had stolen from our joint checking account. Sure enough, I saw the wire transfer sitting untouched in a holding account registered to Beatrice. They were not even trying to hide it. They genuinely believed their actions were justified disciplines against a disobedient wife. But seeing Beatrice's account balance made me curious. I decided to run a full diagnostic on the company accounts payable from the last 2 years. I pulled up the vendor payout logs and started cross-referencing the monthly expenses. In a logistics firm, the highest costs are usually vehicle maintenance, fuel contracts, and warehouse leasing. I expected to see standard invoices from their usual local mechanics and regional fuel suppliers. Instead, my auditing software flagged a massive recurring discrepancy. A payment was being sent out on the 15th of every single month to a company called Sterling Consulting Partners. The invoices were listed under Fleet Optimization Services and Strategic Route Management, but the amounts were absolutely staggering. $30,000 here, $45,000 there. Over the course of 24 months, the logistics firm had paid this single vendor over $1.2 million. I leaned closer to my monitor, my professional instincts screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. I knew every legitimate vendor Terrence and Andre used because I had structured their initial business plan. I had never heard of Sterling Consulting Partners. Furthermore, people who run legitimate local trucking fleets do not pay millions for vague optimization consulting. I pulled the original digital invoices from the server. They were amateurish. The formatting was inconsistent, and the service descriptions were just copied and pasted industry buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. I ran the vendor identification number through the Federal Corporate Registry database. The business was not located in Georgia. It was an offshore limited liability company registered in Delaware with routing numbers tracing back to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. It took me less than 10 minutes to pierce the corporate veil using my firm's advanced investigative tools. I traced the registered agent for the Delaware Limited Liability Company. The name on the official incorporation document stared back at me in stark black and white text. The registered agent was a woman named Brittany Sterling. I sat back in my leather ergonomic chair and let out a long breath. Sterling was Brittany's maiden name. My sister-in-law, the woman who looked down her nose at me, who slapped my hand for eating an appetizer, who constantly paraded around Atlanta, pretending to be high society, was systematically draining the family business. She and Andre were embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars right under Terrence's nose. Terrence was so busy trying to please his mother and look like a big-shot executive that he never bothered to actually read the financial reports. How was the co-owner of a company being robbed blind by his own brother and his brother's entitled wife? I spent the next 4 hours downloading every single ledger, every fake invoice, and every routing number. I compiled the evidence into a highly encrypted digital dossier on my secure private server. I had the smoking gun. Now I just needed to wait for them to give me a reason to pull the trigger. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, I was working from my home office. Malik and Aliyah were at school. I was reviewing some client portfolios when I heard the distinct sound of the heavy oak front door unlocking. Terrence had used his key. I heard heavy footsteps marching through the hardwood hallway. They were not bothering to be quiet. My office door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud thud. Terrence walked in, followed closely by Andre and Beatrice. They looked like a poorly assembled firing squad. They all wore identical expressions of righteous indignation. Terrence was wearing a tailored navy suit, Andre wore a gray blazer, and Beatrice was draped in her usual excessive gold jewelry. They wanted to project power and authority in my own home. I did not stand up. I closed my laptop slowly and folded my hands on the desk. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying absolutely zero emotion. Terrence slammed a thick manila folder onto my desk. "You can sign this," he demanded, pointing a finger at my face. "You are going to sign this right now, and maybe we will let you back into the family accounts." I glanced down at this folder without making a move to touch it. "What exactly is this?" I asked. Andre stepped forward, adjusting the lapels of his blazer. "It is an equity transfer agreement," Andre said, his tone dripping with unearned arrogance. "You currently hold 30% of the logistics company on paper. You are going to sign that equity over to Brittany. Consider it an apology gift for the physical and emotional distress you caused her at the restaurant." I looked from Andre to Terrence and finally to Beatrice. They were completely serious. They had orchestrated this entire home invasion to strong-arm me into surrendering my shares of a multi-million-dollar company because I defended myself against a physical assault. "And if I refuse?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You do not have the luxury of refusing, Zuri. You are a violent, unstable woman who assaulted a family member in public. Terrence has already spoken to a lawyer." Terrence puffed out his chest, trying to look imposing. "If you do not sign that equity over to Brittany today, I am filing for immediate full custody of Malik and Aliyah. I will tell the judge you have severe anger management issues. I will say you are a danger to the children. With my family standing in the community and the restaurant staff as witnesses to your violent outburst, you will lose everything. You will be lucky if you get supervised weekend visits." The threat hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. A weak woman might have broken down in tears. A foolish woman might have screamed and thrown things, giving them exactly the unhinged reaction they wanted to record. But I was neither. I was a mother calculating the exact angle to destroy the people threatening my children. "You cannot just take my kids, Terrence," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "You barely even know their teachers' names. You do not know their doctors or what time they go to bed." "I can and I will," Terrence spat back, leaning over my desk. "You embarrassed me, Zuri. You embarrassed this entire family. Now you are going to pay the price. Sign the papers." Andre chimed in, trying to use legal buzzwords he clearly did not understand. "It is a standard corporate divestiture, Zuri. You breached the fiduciary morality clause of your minority shareholder agreement the moment you assaulted the vice president's wife. If you fight this, we will bury you in litigation fees until you are living in a cardboard box." There was no fiduciary morality clause in our operating agreement. Andre was literally making up legal terms he had heard on television to sound intimidating. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to laugh in his face. Instead, I looked at the three of them cataloging their threats, their extortion, and their absolute stupidity. I picked up the manila folder and handed it back to Terrence. "I will not be signing anything today," I said. "And if you think you can take Malik and Aliyah away from me, you are welcome to try your luck in family court. Now get out of my office so I can get back to my actual job." Beatrice's face twisted in pure rage. "You arrogant little nobody," she hissed. "You are going to regret this. We will destroy your reputation. We will take your children. You will have nothing left." "Get out," I repeated, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. Terrence snatched the folder from my hand. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Zuri," he threatened before turning on his heel and storming out. Andre and Beatrice followed him, slamming the front door on their way out. I sat in the silence of my home office, my heart beating a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. They had drawn their battle lines. They wanted a war over custody and corporate equity. I was more than prepared to give them one. Just as the adrenaline began to settle, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. It was a direct message notification on Instagram from an account with no profile picture and a scrambled username. I unlocked my phone and opened the application. The message contained no text, just a series of 5 photographs. I tapped on the first image and my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of Terrence sitting at a cabana at a luxury resort in Miami. I swiped to the next photo. Terrence was in the resort pool holding a young, light-skinned woman who looked no older than 24. She was wearing a tiny bikini, and her arms were wrapped tightly around his neck. The next 3 photos showed them kissing, drinking expensive cocktails, and walking hand in hand into a private oceanfront suite. The geotags on the photos were from exactly 1 month ago. I distinctly remembered that week. Terrence had told me he was attending a mandatory national logistics convention in Florida. He had complained for days about how boring the seminars were going to be, and how exhausted he was from working so hard to provide for our family. I stared at the images of my husband holding his mistress. The initial sting of betrayal was quickly overshadowed by the analytical side of my brain clicking into overdrive. A luxury cabana in Miami. An oceanfront private suite. Premium liquor. Those things cost a small fortune. Terrence had a terrible habit of maxing out his personal credit cards to buy designer suits, which meant he did not have the personal liquid cash to fund a trip like that out of his own pocket. I immediately reopened my laptop and pulled up the encrypted dossier of the family company's financial ledgers. I searched for the exact dates of the Miami trip, cross-referencing Terrence's corporate credit card expenditures. There it was, clear as day. Terrence had expensed $15,000 to the corporate account during that 5-day period. He had categorized the luxury resort suite, the poolside cabana, and the expensive dinners as client entertainment and convention lodging. He had completely falsified his expense reports to hide his infidelity. My husband did not just cheat on me. He used the family business account to fund his affair, completely unaware that his own brother and his precious white sister-in-law were using that exact same account to embezzle over $1 million. They were all robbing the same sinking ship and trying to make me the scapegoat for their inevitable downfall. I printed the photos of Terrence and his mistress, placing them meticulously into a folder alongside the fraudulent offshore invoices tied to Brittany. They wanted to threaten me with a fabricated narrative of violence and instability. They wanted to steal my equity and threaten my children. I was going to serve them a reality check so devastating they would never recover. I entered my private office and secured the heavy glass door behind me. The environment was a stark contrast to the emotional chaos my husband and his family thrived on. Here in my corporate sanctuary, everything was driven by logic, mathematics, and undeniable proof. I booted up my primary workstation and arranged my 3 monitors. I did not open my daily corporate assignments or respond to pending client emails. My sole focus was the logistics company that Terrence and Andre claimed to have built with their own bare hands. I launched my secure virtual private network and entered the administrative credentials Andre had provided me 6 months prior. They were so technologically negligent that they had not updated a single security protocol since their tax audit concluded. The system granted me full administrative access immediately. I navigated directly to the master financial ledger to trace the $45,000 Terrence had stolen from our joint checking account. It did not take long to locate the missing funds. The wire transfer was sitting untouched in a holding account registered to Beatrice. They were not even attempting to conceal the transaction. They genuinely believed their actions were justified disciplines against a disobedient wife, rather than a legally precarious theft of marital assets. Seeing Beatrice's account balance, however, sparked a much deeper professional curiosity. If they were this arrogant and sloppy with my personal funds, I knew their corporate accounts would be a goldmine of financial mismanagement. I decided to run a comprehensive diagnostic on the company accounts payable from the last 2 years. I initiated a targeted query to cross-reference their monthly operating expenses with their stated revenue. In a standard logistics firm, the highest operational costs are typically vehicle maintenance, commercial fuel contracts, and warehouse leasing. I fully expected to see routine invoices from their local mechanics and regional fuel suppliers. Instead, my forensic auditing software flagged a massive recurring discrepancy hidden deep within their administrative overhead expenses. A substantial payment was being routed on the 15th of every single month to a corporate entity called Sterling Consulting Partners. The invoices were broadly categorized under fleet optimization services and strategic route management. However, the financial amounts were absolutely staggering. $30,000 one month, $45,000 the next. Over the course of 24 months, the logistics firm had remitted over $1.2 million to this single vendor. I leaned closer to my monitor, my professional instincts sharpening. I knew every legitimate vendor Terrence and Andre utilized because I had personally structured their initial business plan and operating budget. I had never encountered the name Sterling Consulting Partners. Furthermore, companies that operate local trucking fleets do not pay millions of dollars for vague optimization consulting without detailed, tangible deliverables. I pulled the original digital invoices from the secure server and examined them closely. They were incredibly amateurish. The formatting was inconsistent, and the service descriptions consisted of copied and pasted industry jargon that meant absolutely nothing from an operational standpoint. There were no project milestones, no hourly breakdowns, and no corresponding communications regarding the services allegedly provided. It was a classic phantom vendor scheme designed to siphon untaxed revenue out of the primary business account. I opened a new encrypted window and ran the vendor identification number through the Federal Corporate Registry database. I needed to know exactly who was receiving over $1 million of the company profits. The search results confirmed my darkest suspicions. The business was not located in Georgia, nor was it an established logistics consulting firm. It was an offshore limited liability company registered in Delaware with routing numbers tracing directly back to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. This was not gross incompetence. This was highly calculated corporate fraud. I utilized my firm's advanced investigative software to pierce the corporate veil. Offshore accounts are designed to provide anonymity, but amateur fraudsters always leave a digital trail when they register their domestic shell companies. I requested the original incorporation documents for the Delaware Limited Liability Company and waited as the database retrieved the scanned files. When the document loaded on my screen, the name of the registered agent stared back at me in stark black text. The registered agent was a woman named Brittany Sterling. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow, measured breath. Sterling was Brittany's maiden name. My sister-in-law, the white woman who looked down her nose at me, who slapped my hand for eating an appetizer, who constantly paraded around Atlanta, pretending to be high society, was systematically draining the family business. She and Andre were embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars right under Terrence's nose. Terrence was so utterly consumed with trying to please his mother and project the image of a wealthy executive that he never bothered to review the actual financial reports. How was the co-owner of a company being robbed blind by his own brother and his brother's entitled wife? The historical irony was almost poetic. Beatrice treated Brittany like the ultimate prize, praising her cultural refinement and social grace, while treating me like an uncultured burden. Yet I was the one who had funded their empire, and Brittany was the parasite actively bleeding it dry. They were all robbing the same sinking ship while looking down on the woman who had built the very vessel keeping them afloat. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously downloading every single ledger, every fake invoice, and every routing number tied to the phantom vendor. I captured the digital footprints verifying the authorization signatures on the wire transfers. Andre had approved every single payment confirming his direct involvement in the embezzlement scheme. I compiled the evidence into a highly encrypted digital dossier on my secure private server storing redundant backups in multiple locations. I now possessed the absolute leverage I needed. They wanted to threaten my financial stability and demand my submission. They wanted to remind me of my place in their family. I was going to serve them a reality check, so devastating that they would face federal wire fraud charges. I had the smoking gun safely secured in my possession. Now I just needed to wait for them to make their next move and give me the perfect opportunity to pull the trigger. 2 days passed in complete silence. The frozen bank account remained untouched, and Terrence had not returned home. I knew exactly where he was. He was camped out in his childhood bedroom at Beatrice's house, soaking up his mother's validation while plotting his next move. I used that quiet time to meticulously organize the digital evidence I had extracted from their servers. Every fake invoice and offshore wire transfer was safely locked in an encrypted file on my personal hard drive. The kids, Malik and Aliyah, were completely unaware of the looming storm. I dropped them off at their respective middle and elementary schools. That Tuesday morning, kissed their foreheads and drove back to my house to work from my home office. My home office was my sanctuary. I had designed the space myself, paying for the custom mahogany built-ins and the ergonomic setup with my own annual corporate bonus. It was a space built on actual hard work, not inherited privilege or loud bragging. I was in the middle of reviewing a legitimate corporate audit for a client when the silence of the empty house was suddenly broken. I heard the distinct heavy click of the front door deadbolt sliding open. Terrence still had his key. I did not get up from my desk. I simply paused my music and listened. The footsteps echoing down the hardwood hallway were aggressive and deliberate. There was more than one person. I could hear the sharp clack of Beatrice's designer heels and the heavy thud of Andre's leather loafers accompanying my husband's stride. They were marching through my home like an occupying army trying to generate a sense of physical intimidation before they even reached my door. The heavy oak door of my office swung open so violently that the brass handles struck the drywall. Terrence walked in first, his chest puffed out in a tailored navy suit that I knew for a fact he had put on a high-interest credit card. Andre followed close behind him wearing a gray blazer and an arrogant smirk. Beatrice brought up the rear draped in excessive gold jewelry and a silk scarf, looking around my office with her usual expression of deep distaste. They arranged themselves in a semicircle in front of my desk, standing shoulder to shoulder. They looked like a poorly assembled firing squad. I did not stand up. I did not flinch. I slowly closed my laptop, folded my hands together, and rested them on the polished surface of my desk. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying absolutely zero emotion. Terrence marched forward and slammed a thick manila folder onto the center of my desk. The loud smack of the paper against the wood was supposed to make me jump. I just stared at it. "You can sign this," Terrence demanded, pointing a rigid finger at my face. "You are going to sign this right now, and maybe we will let you back into the family accounts, so you can buy groceries for the kids." I glanced down at the blank cover of the folder without making a single move to touch it. "What exactly is this?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on his. Andre stepped forward, adjusting the lapels of his blazer with a practiced arrogance. "It is an equity transfer agreement," Andre said, his tone dripping with unearned authority. "You currently hold 30% of the logistics company on paper. You are going to sign that equity over to Brittany today. Consider it an apology gift for the physical and emotional distress you caused her at the restaurant." I looked from Andre to Terrence and finally over to Beatrice. They were completely serious. They had orchestrated this entire home invasion to strong-arm me into surrendering my legal shares of a multi-million-dollar business simply because I defended myself against a physical assault from a white woman who disrespected me. Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. Brittany has been suffering from severe anxiety since your little ghetto outburst, Zuri. She has had to see a chiropractor for her neck. You humiliated her in public and you humiliated this family. Turning over your empty corporate shares is the absolute bare minimum you can do to make amends. Honestly, you should be grateful we are not pressing assault charges and having you locked up. The sheer audacity was almost blinding. They were demanding I hand over a third of a company that I had single-handedly saved from bankruptcy. And the person they wanted me to give it to was the very same woman who was actively bleeding their company dry. I looked at Andre, who stood there looking so smug and victorious. The absolute historical irony was staggering. Andre was demanding I give my corporate equity to Brittany, the exact same woman he was secretly using to siphon over $1 million out of his own company. And standing right next to him was my foolish husband Terrence, acting as their aggressive enforcer, completely oblivious to the fact that his own brother and sister-in-law were robbing him blind. Terrence was so desperate to be the big man in his mother's eyes that he was actively helping his family steal his own wealth. And if I refuse, I asked, leaning back in my chair, making sure my posture communicated total relaxation. You do not have the luxury of refusing, Zuri. Beatrice spat, her fake southern charm entirely gone. You are a violent, unstable woman who assaulted a family member. Terrence has already spoken to our corporate lawyer. Andre nodded, trying to use legal buzzwords he clearly did not understand to sound intimidating. It is a standard corporate divestiture, Zuri. You breached the fiduciary morality clause of your minority shareholder agreement the moment you assaulted the vice president's wife. If you fight this, we will bury you in litigation fees until you are living in a cardboard box on the side of the highway. There was no fiduciary morality clause in our operating agreement. Andre was literally making up legal terms he had heard on television to sound smart. It took every ounce of professional self-control I possessed not to laugh directly in his face. Instead, I looked at the three of them cataloging their threats, their extortion, and their absolute blinding stupidity. As they stood in my office, I analyzed their body language. Terrence was acting out of pure ego, defensive, because he knew deep down he had no real power over me. He relied on my income to fund his lifestyle, and the cognitive dissonance was driving him crazy. Andre was acting out of greed. He wanted my 30% equity to consolidate his power, probably, so he and Brittany could embezzle the rest of the company funds without any oversight. And Beatrice was acting out of pure spite. She could not stand that a dark-skinned woman from a working-class background had outpaced her precious high-society family in both education and wealth. I picked up the manila folder between two fingers as if it were contaminated. I held it out toward Terrence. I will not be signing anything today, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, steady register. And there is no corporate lawyer on earth who would validate a forced equity transfer under the threat of domestic financial abuse. Now take your ridiculous paperwork and get out of my office so I can get back to my actual job. Terrence snatched the folder from my hand, his face flushing with dark, angry color. You do not get to dismiss us, Zuri. You are not in charge here. You think you are so smart because you work for some corporate firm, but you are nothing without my name. You sign this paper, or I am going to make your life a living hell. I stood up slowly. I was not a tall woman, but the sheer force of my calm demeanor made Terrence take a half-step backward. I am not intimidated by loud voices, Terrence. And I am certainly not intimidated by fake legal documents drafted by people who do not even know how to properly balance a general ledger. You have 5 seconds to leave my house before I call the police and report a home invasion. Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. You arrogant little nobody, she hissed. You are going to regret this. We will destroy your reputation in this city. We will strip you of everything you hold dear. You will have absolutely nothing left when we are done with you. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. We will see about that, Beatrice. Terrence realized that slamming folders and raising his voice was not working. His usual tactics of intimidation, which worked perfectly on his subordinate employees, were completely useless against a woman who audited multi-billion-dollar corporations for a living. The frustration in his eyes morphed into something much more vindictive. He looked at his mother, who gave him a sharp nod of encouragement. It was the absolute signal to abandon the corporate theft and escalate to a much more personal and devastating attack. I did not wait for Terrence to make good on his threat to file for custody. I was not going to play defense while they tried to build a fabricated case against me. The very next morning, I took a personal day from my corporate firm. I drove straight to the most ruthless family law attorney in Atlanta, a woman named Valerie, who had a reputation for financially eviscerating unfaithful spouses. I sat in her pristine glass office and slid 2 folders across her desk. One contained the standard financial disclosures required for a divorce. The other contained the high-definition photographs of Terrence with his 24-year-old mistress, and the highlighted corporate ledgers proving he used company funds to finance his adultery. Valerie opened the folders, reviewed the documents, and looked up at me with a sharp, predatory smile. She drafted the divorce petition and the emergency custody orders immediately. She asked if I wanted to hire a process server to deliver the documents to Terrence. I politely declined. I wanted to hand him the paperwork myself. I wanted to look him in the eye when his entire world began to fracture. I drove directly to the main office of the family logistics company. The building was an impressive 2-story brick structure in an upscale commercial park, a building my premarital savings had helped them lease. I walked through the double glass doors, holding the thick manila envelope. The receptionist, a young woman who had always been polite to me, widened her eyes when she saw me march past her desk without a word. Terrence was standing in the center of the open concept bullpen. He was holding a cup of coffee and bragging loudly to a group of his subordinate employees about a golf tournament he planned to attend. Andre was sitting at a nearby desk, nodding along. They were playing the roles of powerful, untouchable executives. I walked right up to Terrence. The conversation died instantly. As the employees noticed my presence, the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Terrence stopped smiling. He looked at the envelope in my hand and puffed out his chest, trying to project dominance in front of his staff. "What are you doing here, Zuri?" he demanded, his voice loud and condescending. "I told you I am not speaking to you until you learn how to respect this family. We are busy running a multi-million-dollar company. We do not have time for your temper tantrums." I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of the rage burning in my chest. I simply extended my arm and pressed the thick envelope directly against his chest, forcing him to take it. "Consider yourself served, Terrence," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent office. "Those are divorce papers and a petition for primary custody of Malik and Aliyah. I suggest you find a very good lawyer." Terrence looked down at the envelope and then let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. He looked around at his employees, shaking his head as if I were a hysterical child throwing a fit. He ripped the envelope open, pulled out the legal petition, and waved it in the air for everyone to see. "You must be completely out of your mind," he announced, projecting his voice so every single person in the bullpen could hear him. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? You abandoned your duties as a wife, Zuri. You assaulted my sister-in-law in public. You are unstable. My lawyer is going to drag you through family court until you have absolutely nothing left. You are not getting a single dime of this company, and you are certainly not taking my children." Andre stood up, smirking, crossing his arms over his chest. "You should have signed the equity transfer when you had the chance, Zuri. Now you are going to leave this marriage with the exact same empty pockets you had when we brought you into this family." I let them perform. I let them posture and brag in front of their employees because I knew something they did not. I knew their company was a hollow shell bleeding cash to an offshore account. I knew Terrence had left a digital trail of his infidelity a mile wide. "I will see you in court, Terrence," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the building with my head held high. By the time I reached my house, the retaliation had already begun. My phone was vibrating nonstop with notifications from social media. I opened my local community application and saw exactly what they had done. Brittany had posted a highly edited, tearful video of herself. She was sitting on her expensive beige sofa, wearing a thick medical prop neck brace. She was sobbing to the camera, claiming she had been brutally and senselessly assaulted by an angry, unhinged relative at a public restaurant. She did not use my name, but in our specific Atlanta social circles, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. She claimed she was suffering from severe physical trauma and crippling anxiety. She painted herself as the fragile, innocent victim of a dark-skinned woman's uncontrollable rage. The video was going viral. The comments were flooded with people offering their prayers and condemning the unnamed attacker. Beatrice was sharing the video everywhere, adding her own dramatic commentary about how the family was traumatized, but standing strong together against domestic violence. My voicemail was full of vicious messages from Beatrice. She threatened to call the human resources department of my corporate firm to report me for violent behavior. She promised to destroy my professional reputation and ensure I never worked in corporate accounting again. She told me I was a ghetto embarrassment and that she was personally funding Terrence's custody battle. They expected me to react. They expected me to post a frantic defense online or call them screaming and crying. They wanted to engage me in a muddy public battle where they could use their status to paint me as the crazy, bitter ex-wife. I maintained absolute public silence. I did not defend myself on the internet. I did not answer their calls. I moved in the shadows with the precision of a surgeon. I compiled my complete forensic audit report detailing the $1.2 million Brittany and Andre had embezzled through phantom vendors. I included the offshore bank routing numbers, the fake invoices, and the digital access logs proving Andre had authorized every single transfer. I added the corporate expense reports proving Terrence had committed tax fraud by writing off his romantic vacation as a business expense. I placed everything into a secure, encrypted digital vault. I forwarded a blind copy to Valerie, my divorce attorney. Then I sat at my desk, picked up my phone, and made a single methodical phone call to the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower hotline. Because I am a certified corporate forensic auditor, I knew exactly which federal tax codes they had violated. I knew exactly which department needed the information. I handed the federal government a perfectly packaged $1 million corporate fraud case on a silver platter. 3 days later, the mail carrier walked into the logistics company headquarters. He handed the receptionist a thick certified envelope marked urgent. The return address bore the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. Terrence and Andre took the letter into their private office, assuming I had petty reported a minor tax error to cause them a brief headache. They arrogantly tore open the seal, completely unaware that their entire lives were about to be dismantled. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, echoing loudly through the quiet hallways of my home. Terrence, Andre, and Beatrice had finally left. I remained seated at my custom mahogany desk in my home office, letting the silence wash over me. The oppressive scent of Beatrice's excessive floral perfume still hung in the air, a lingering reminder of their hostile invasion. I took a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. They truly believed they had won the afternoon. They thought that storming into my sanctuary, throwing a contract in my face, and threatening to take my children away would break my spirit. Terrence had looked so arrogant, issuing his threats about full custody, while Andre threw around meaningless legal terms. They wanted me to feel small, isolated, and terrified. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity. As I sat there processing the sheer audacity of their demands, my personal cell phone vibrated against the polished wood of my desk. The sudden buzzing startled me slightly. I assumed it was going to be a follow-up text message from Terrence, continuing his tantrum, or perhaps a vicious voicemail from Beatrice demanding my submission. I picked up the device and looked at the screen. It was an Instagram notification. I had received a direct message request from an account I did not recognize. The profile had 0 followers, 0 posts, and a blank gray silhouette for a display picture. It was clearly a burner account created specifically to contact me. My professional instincts kicked in immediately. I unlocked my phone and opened the application, tapping on the message request. There was no text greeting or explanation. There was only a series of 5 high-resolution photographs sent one after another. I tapped on the first image and the breath completely left my lungs. It was my husband. Terrence was lounging comfortably in a private shaded cabana at a luxury beach resort. I recognized the custom designer sunglasses he was wearing and the expensive gold watch he had purchased for himself last year. But my husband was not alone. Sitting on his lap with her arms wrapped tightly around his neck was a very young, light-skinned woman. She looked like she was barely 24 years old. She was wearing a tiny designer bikini and laughing brightly as Terrence kissed her cheek. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly as I swiped to the second photograph. The two of them were standing waist-deep in the sparkling water of a private infinity pool. They were holding crystal champagne flutes and smiling intimately at each other. The third photo showed them walking hand in hand into a lavish oceanfront hotel suite. The fourth and fifth photos were taken at a high-end nightclub, showing them drinking premium liquor in a VIP section. I looked closely at the small digital geotags embedded in the images. Miami, Florida. I checked the timestamps. The photos were taken exactly 1 month ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. 1 month ago, Terrence told me he was required to attend a mandatory Southeast Regional Logistics Conference. I vividly remembered him packing his expensive suits into his leather carry-on bag, complaining loudly about how exhausting the trip was going to be. He had paced around our kitchen, telling me how hard he had to work to build a legacy for our children, and how much he dreaded sitting in stuffy convention center ballrooms for 5 straight days. I had even packed him extra snacks and ironed his shirts to make his business trip easier. When he was in Miami, he had called me every evening complaining about the boring seminars and the long networking dinners. I was not at a logistics conference. He was playing sugar daddy to a woman a full decade younger than him. I sat alone in my office staring at the glowing screen of my phone. A strange mixture of disgust and absolute vindication washed over me. Terrence had the unmitigated gall to stand in my home just moments ago and threaten to take Malik and Aliyah away from me. He had looked me dead in the eye and claimed I was an unfit and violently unstable mother, all while he was actively living a double life. He wanted to punish me for spending $2,500 on our anniversary dinner while he was flying a mistress across state lines. The initial shock of the betrayal quickly faded. The emotional pain was entirely eclipsed by the cold analytical precision that made me an exceptional corporate forensic accountant. I zoomed in on the background of the resort photos. The architecture was highly distinctive. I recognized the property as an ultra-exclusive five-star hotel located in South Beach. Private poolside cabanas, premium vintage champagne, and oceanfront penthouse suites at that specific property cost thousands of dollars a single night. I knew our personal marital finances intimately. Terrence had a terrible habit of maxing out his personal credit cards to maintain his flashy image and buy things to impress his mother. He absolutely did not have the personal liquid cash to fund a 5-day luxury vacation for himself and a mistress. That money had to come from somewhere else. I immediately pushed my chair forward and opened my laptop. I launched my secure virtual private network and bypassed the weak security protocols of the family logistics company. I accessed their master financial ledger and navigated to the corporate expense reports targeting the exact 5-day window of the Miami trip. I filtered the financial transactions by the corporate credit card issued exclusively to Terrence. The screen populated with a long, detailed list of exorbitant charges, and the truth laid itself bare before my eyes. Terrence did not just cheat on me. He committed blatant corporate tax fraud to fund his infidelity. I read down the list of charges. There was a $6,000 charge for the oceanfront suite. There was a $2,000 charge at a high-end Miami jewelry boutique, likely for the diamond tennis bracelet the mistress was wearing in the nightclub photo. There were multiple charges ranging from $500 to $1,000 at premium steakhouses and exclusive beach clubs. Terrence had expensed over $15,000 to the family business account. He had fraudulently categorized the luxury cabana, the romantic dinners, and the jewelry as client entertainment and executive convention lodging. He used the company funds to pay for his affair, assuming nobody would ever check the receipts. I leaned back in my leather chair and let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The sheer magnitude of the dysfunction and criminality in this family was absolutely staggering. I looked at the dual monitors on my desk. On the left screen, I had the offshore banking files proving that Andre and Brittany were systematically bleeding the logistics company dry, having embezzled over $1.2 million through phantom consulting vendors. On the right screen, I had the corporate expense reports proving Terrence was draining the exact same account to fund his secret romantic getaways. They were all stealing from the same sinking ship. My husband was completely oblivious to his brother's massive theft because he was too busy committing fraud of his own. Andre and Brittany thought they were the masterminds of a perfect crime, completely unaware that the CEO owner of the company was treating the corporate account like a personal slush fund. And all of them, Beatrice included, had the nerve to look down on me. They treated me like a lower-class servant who should be grateful for their presence. They demanded I sign over my hard-earned corporate equity to apologize to a woman who was actively robbing them. The poetic irony was almost too perfect. My premarital savings had built the foundation of their entire operation, and now their arrogance and greed were tearing it apart from the inside out. I connected my phone to my computer and downloaded the high-resolution photos of Terrence and his mistress. I printed the images on thick, glossy paper, watching as the proof of his betrayal slid out of the printer tray. I took the photos and placed them meticulously into a fresh red folder. I placed that folder right next to the thick file containing the fraudulent offshore invoices tied to Brittany's maiden name. Terrence wanted to lock my bank accounts and demand respect. He wanted to declare war over child custody and corporate shares. He wanted to destroy my life to protect his fragile ego and his family's high society facade. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed a loaded weapon to the exact person who knew how to aim for the fatal shot. I gathered my files, locked them in my desk drawer, and picked up my phone to call the most ruthless divorce attorney in Atlanta. The time for keeping the peace was officially over. My husband tried to threaten me with full custody of our children to protect his million-dollar corporate fraud and his 24-year-old mistress. He assumed I would cower in my home and wait for his next strike. Instead, I took his financial secrets, marched straight into the center of his logistics firm, and handed him his absolute worst nightmare in front of his entire staff. I sat at my desk and ended the call with my corporate office taking a personal day. I had the printed photographs of Terrence and his mistress secured in a red folder right alongside the digital footprints of Andre and Brittany, embezzling over $1 million. I picked up my phone and called Valerie. Valerie was the most ruthless family law attorney in Atlanta. She was a woman who had built her entire reputation on financially eviscerating unfaithful spouses and dismantling toxic family dynamics in the courtroom. When she answered, I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told her about the frozen bank accounts, the home invasion, and the threats regarding my children. Then I told her about the offshore shell company and the corporate funds Terrence used to finance his infidelity in Miami. I could practically hear Valerie smiling through the receiver. She told me to come to her office immediately. I drove downtown and sat in her pristine glass office, sliding the two folders across her polished desk. Valerie reviewed the documents with the cold precision of a predator locking onto its prey. She drafted the divorce petition and the emergency protective custody orders right then and there. When she printed the final documents, she asked if I wanted her to hire a professional process server to deliver the paperwork to Terrence at his office. I politely declined her offer. I wanted to hand him the paperwork myself. I wanted to look my husband in the eye when his carefully constructed world began to fracture. I left her office holding the thick sealed manila envelope. I drove directly to the main headquarters of the family logistics company. The building was an impressive two-story brick structure located in an upscale commercial park. Looking at the manicured landscaping and the sleek corporate signage, I felt a familiar wave of historical irony. My premarital savings had helped them secure the lease for this exact building. I had structured the financial projections that convinced the property management group to give them a chance. Now I was walking through those same double-glass doors to burn it all down. The lobby was bright and modern. The receptionist, a young woman who had always been polite to me, widened her eyes when she saw me march past her desk without a single word. She opened her mouth to announce me, but the absolute finality in my expression made her close it instantly. I pushed through the interior doors and stepped into the main open-concept bullpen where the dispatchers and account managers worked. Terrence was standing directly in the center of the room. He was holding a ceramic cup of coffee and bragging loudly to a group of his subordinate employees. He was wearing another expensive custom suit and holding court like an untouchable king. He was telling them an exaggerated story about a golf tournament he planned to attend, clearly trying to project the image of a wealthy, carefree executive. Andre was sitting at a nearby desk, leaning back in his chair, and nodding along with his brother's arrogant performance. I did not hesitate. I walked right up to Terrence with my head held high. The conversation died the exact second his employees noticed my presence. The sudden silence in the bullpen was so heavy it felt suffocating. Keyboards stopped clicking. Telephone conversations were put on hold. Every single eye in the room locked onto me. Terrence stopped smiling. He looked at the thick envelope in my hand, and his posture immediately shifted. He puffed out his chest, trying to project dominance and control in front of his staff. He desperately needed them to believe he was the one in charge of our dynamic. "What are you doing here, Zuri?" he demanded, his voice loud and intentionally condescending. "I told you I am not speaking to you until you learn how to respect this family. We are busy running a multi-million-dollar company. We do not have time to entertain your temper tantrums in the middle of the workday." I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of the righteous rage burning in my chest. I simply extended my arm and pressed the thick envelope directly against his chest, forcing him to either take it or let it fall to the floor. He instinctively grabbed it. "Consider yourself served, Terrence," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent office. "Those are divorce papers and a petition for primary custody of Malik and Aliyah. I suggest you find a very good lawyer because the one you have right now is not going to be able to save you." Terrence looked down at the envelope and a flash of genuine panic crossed his eyes. But his ego was far too fragile to show weakness in front of his employees. He let out a loud, exaggerated laugh, throwing his head back to show the room how unbothered he was. He ripped the envelope open, pulled out the legal petition, and waved the papers in the air for everyone to see. "You must be completely out of your mind," he announced, projecting his voice, so every single person in the bullpen could hear him clearly. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten me with this garbage? You abandoned your duties as a wife, Zuri. You assaulted my sister-in-law in public like an unhinged lunatic. You are completely unstable. My lawyer is going to drag you through family court until you have absolutely nothing left. You are not getting a single dime of this company, and you are certainly not taking my children away from me." Andre stood up from his desk, smirking and crossing his arms over his chest. He walked over to stand shoulder to shoulder with Terrence, presenting a united front. "You should have signed the equity transfer when you had the chance." "Zuri," Andre said, his tone dripping with mock pity. "Now you are going to leave this marriage with the exact same empty pockets you had when we graciously brought you into this family. You played your hand terribly. I let them perform. I stood perfectly still and let them posture and brag in front of their captive audience. They wanted their employees to see them as powerful men, putting a hysterical woman in her place. They had absolutely no idea that I knew their company was a hollow shell bleeding cash to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They had no idea I had digital copies of the fraudulent invoices. And Terrence was completely oblivious to the fact that his own brother was robbing him while he was busy expensing a luxury Miami vacation with a 24-year-old girl. I looked at Terrence taking in his expensive suit and his arrogant smile. He thought the divorce papers were the worst thing in that envelope. He thought family court was going to be his battleground. He did not know that the real war was going to be fought in federal court. "I will see you in court, Terrence," I said, keeping my tone ice cold and perfectly professional. I turned on my heel and walked back through the bullpen, my steps echoing against the polished concrete floor. I did not rush. I did not look back. I walked out of the building knowing with absolute mathematical certainty that Terrence had just signed his own professional and financial death warrant in front of his entire staff. The public serving was merely the opening move. The real destruction was coming, and they would never see it until it was far too late. By the time I reached my car in the office parking lot, the adrenaline had faded into a cool, steady rhythm. I sat behind the steering wheel and placed my phone in the center console. I expected Terrence to call me screaming about the divorce papers, but my screen remained dark for the entire drive back to my house. I thought perhaps the reality of his situation had finally paralyzed him. I was wrong. Terrence was not reflecting on his failures. He and his family were busy launching a coordinated public attack. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my phone began to vibrate violently against the plastic cup holder. It was not a phone call. It was a torrential flood of notifications from every social media platform I had installed. Dozens of text messages from mutual acquaintances poured in one after another. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and opened my local community application to see exactly what they had done. Right at the top of my feed, boosted by an algorithm and shared by dozens of people in our Atlanta social circles, was a video of Brittany. She was sitting on her expensive beige sofa, wearing a thick white medical prop neck brace. She had clearly scrubbed her face of makeup to look as pale and fragile as humanly possible. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest. She stared directly into the camera and began to sob. It was an absolute masterclass in weaponized victimhood. Brittany wept to the camera, claiming she had been brutally and senselessly assaulted by an angry, unhinged relative at a public restaurant. She wiped away a single dramatic tear and talked about how she was currently suffering from severe physical trauma and crippling anxiety. She claimed she could not even turn her head without shooting pain radiating down her spine. She did not use my name, but in our specific social networks, she did not have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. She painted herself as the innocent, terrified victim of a dark-skinned woman's uncontrollable rage. The racial undertones were deafening. She was playing into every single toxic stereotype she could weaponize, trying to brand me as a violent, aggressive black woman who attacked a defenseless white woman without provocation. She spun a narrative that she had merely been trying to practice basic family etiquette and was met with a savage physical attack. She begged her followers for prayers and asked for privacy during this incredibly dark and traumatic time. The video was going viral. The comments section was a horrifying echo chamber of misplaced sympathy. Women from Beatrice's elite social clubs, members of our church congregation, and wives of Andre's business associates were flooding the video with their support. They were calling for my arrest. They were praising Brittany for her bravery in speaking out against domestic violence. Terrence had even commented on the video, leaving a praying hands emoji and a statement about how his family was standing strong together in the face of senseless hostility. My own husband was publicly validating a smear campaign against the mother of his children to protect the woman who was secretly stealing his money. I closed the application and opened my voicemail. I had 5 new messages, all from Beatrice. I pressed play on the first one, and the sheer venom in my mother-in-law's voice filled the quiet cabin of my car. "You ghetto embarrassment," Beatrice hissed through the speaker. "You think you can walk into my son's business and throw divorce papers in his face? You think you are in control. I am going to destroy you, Suri. Everyone is seeing Brittany's video. The entire city knows exactly what kind of animal you really are. I am calling the Human Resources Department at your corporate firm first thing tomorrow morning. I am going to tell them you are a violent threat to the workplace. I will make sure you lose your security clearance. I will make sure you never crunch a single number in this city again. You are going to be penniless, and my son is going to take those children away from you." The voicemails continued, each one more unhinged and desperate than the last. Beatrice was practically foaming at the mouth, determined to ruin my professional reputation to protect her precious high society aesthetic. She truly believed that public opinion was the ultimate currency. She thought that if she could get me fired and publicly shamed, I would have no choice but to surrender my corporate equity and beg for their mercy. I sat in my car listening to the final voicemail end. They expected me to react. They desperately wanted me to react. They wanted me to post a frantic, angry defense online. They wanted me to go live on social media, yelling and crying, trying to explain my side of the story. They wanted me to call Beatrice screaming so she could record it and prove to the world that I was the bitter, unstable ex-wife they claimed I was. They needed me to engage in a messy public mudslinging contest, because that was the only battlefield where they had any ammunition. I maintained absolute public silence. I did not type a single comment. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not block them or delete my accounts. I walked inside my house, poured myself a glass of cold water, and let them dig their own graves for the entire world to see. Public opinion does not pay a mortgage. Internet sympathy does not clear a negative bank balance. And social media followers cannot protect you from a federal indictment. They were playing checkers for an audience of gossips. I was playing a high-stakes game of chess with the federal government. I walked into my home office and woke up my computer. The time for gathering evidence was over. It was time to execute the final maneuver. I compiled my complete forensic audit report into a single highly encrypted digital file. The dossier detailed the $1.2 million Brittany and Andre had embezzled through their phantom consulting vendors. It included the offshore bank routing numbers, the fake invoices, and the digital access logs proving Andre had authorized every single illegal wire transfer to Brittany's shell company. I also attached the corporate expense reports proving Terrence had committed blatant tax fraud by writing off his romantic luxury vacation in Miami as a business expense, along with the high-definition photos of his 24-year-old mistress. I forwarded a blind copy of the entire encrypted file to Valerie, my divorce attorney, with a simple note instructing her to hold it for the upcoming custody hearing. Then I sat back in my chair, picked up my cell phone, and dialed a specific toll-free number I had memorized years ago. It was the direct line to the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower hotline. Because I am a certified corporate forensic auditor, I did not have to wait in a generic queue or speak to a low-level intake representative. I provided my professional credential numbers and was transferred directly to a specialized intake agent in the corporate fraud division. I remained completely devoid of emotion as I spoke. I did not mention the slap, the divorce, or the viral video. I simply reported a massive ongoing tax evasion and corporate embezzlement scheme operating out of a registered logistics firm in Atlanta, Georgia. I provided the exact offshore routing numbers, the names of the phantom vendors, and the specific dates of the fraudulent corporate travel expenses. I handed the federal government a perfectly packaged multi-million-dollar corporate fraud case on a silver platter. I gave them everything they needed to freeze accounts, seize assets, and issue federal subpoenas. I ended the call and set my phone face down on my desk. Brittany could have her viral video and her prop neck brace. Beatrice could have her high society gossip and her vicious voicemails. Terrence could have his arrogant posturing in front of his employees. They thought they were destroying my reputation. They had absolutely no idea that in 3 short days, their entire world was going to be seized by the United States government. The hardest thing to do when people are publicly destroying your character is to do absolutely nothing at all. Human nature screams at you to defend yourself, to post the screenshots, to yell your truth from the rooftops, so everyone can see you are not the monster they are painting you to be. Over the next 48 hours, Brittany's tearful video wearing that ridiculous prop neck brace surpassed 100,000 views in our local social circles. My phone practically vibrated off my kitchen counter with text messages from women in Beatrice's social clubs, members of our church congregation, and wives of Andre's business associates. They were demanding explanations. They were telling me I needed to seek professional help for my anger issues. I ignored every single one of them. I turned off my notifications, placed my phone on silent, and poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee. Silence is the absolute worst punishment you can inflict on a narcissist. Beatrice, Terrence, and Brittany had set a trap. They desperately needed me to engage. They needed me to leave an angry comment or call them screaming so they could record it and prove to their audience that I was the bitter, aggressive black woman they claimed I was. By giving them absolute radio silence, I was denying them the very oxygen they needed to keep their performative fire burning. I let them punch themselves out swinging at a brick wall. My primary concern was shielding my children from the crossfire. Malik and Aliyah were smart, and they knew something was wrong because their father had not been home in days. I sat them down at the kitchen island over breakfast. I kept my posture relaxed and my voice soft. I told them that their father and I were having some adult disagreements and that we would be living in separate houses for a while. I did not burden them with the details of the mistresses or the stolen money. I simply assured them that they were loved, that they were safe, and that my home would always be a place of peace. Before I sent them to school, I quietly disabled the internet browsers on their tablets and phones. I was not going to let them stumble across their aunt faking a neck injury for internet sympathy. Once the kids were safely on the school bus, I had to handle Beatrice's ultimate threat. She had promised in her vicious voicemails to call my corporate firm and destroy my professional reputation. Beatrice truly believed that because she sat on the board of a few local charities, her word carried weight in the corporate financial sector. She thought she could get me fired and strip me of my independence. I did not wait for her to strike. I proactively scheduled a brief morning meeting with my managing partner, a no-nonsense man who valued my audit reports more than anything else in the firm. I calmly explained that I was going through a highly contentious divorce and that my in-laws were currently launching a coordinated social media smear campaign against me. I warned him that my mother-in-law might attempt to contact the Human Resources Department with fabricated claims about my mental stability. My managing partner simply nodded, jotted down a note, and thanked me for the professional heads-up. Later that afternoon, Beatrice actually made good on her threat. She called the main line of my firm and demanded to speak to the head of human resources. She launched into a theatrical speech about how I was a violent threat to the workplace and how the firm needed to revoke my security clearance immediately before I assaulted a coworker. The human resources director, having already been briefed, simply let Beatrice finish her rant. Then she calmly informed my mother-in-law that the firm took external harassment of their senior auditors very seriously and that the phone call was being recorded for our legal department to pursue a potential defamation lawsuit. Beatrice panicked, stammered an excuse, and hung up the phone so fast she probably dropped it. Her ultimate high society weapon had completely failed against a solid corporate firewall. While my family was busy playing internet games, I was dealing with the reality of the federal drop I had just initiated. My personal cell phone rang later that evening. It was Valerie, my divorce attorney. I had sent her the blind copy of the encrypted forensic audit the night before, right after I got off the phone with the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower hotline. When I answered the call, Valerie was practically vibrating with professional excitement. "Zuri," she said, her voice filled with a predatory kind of awe. "I have been practicing family and corporate divorce law for 22 years. I have seen men hide money in mattresses. I have seen them funnel cash to fake businesses. But I have never in my entire career seen a spouse document their own financial destruction with such breathtaking incompetence." I smiled, leaning back against my kitchen counter. "The offshore accounts trace perfectly, do they not?" I asked. "It is a masterpiece." Valerie laughed. "You handed me the exact routing numbers for over $1 million in embezzled corporate funds tied directly to your sister-in-law. And the expense reports for Terrence. The sheer audacity of this man to write off a $15,000 romantic vacation with a 24-year-old girl as a tax-deductible business expense is going to make the judge's head spin. Zuri, this is not just a divorce discovery file. This is a federal indictment wrapped with a neat little bow. We finalized our legal strategy." Valerie was going to hold the financial bombshells close to her chest. We were going to let Terrence and his lawyer walk into the preliminary divorce hearings acting arrogant and entitled. We were going to let them demand full custody and claim I was broke. Then Valerie was going to drop the audit report on the table and watch them suffocate. But I knew they might not even make it to family court before the federal government tore their lives apart. 3 days passed since I made my phone call to the Corporate Fraud Division of the IRS. When you provide the federal government with a highly authenticated forensic audit, complete with offshore routing numbers and falsified tax write-offs, they do not waste time. They do not put it in a slow-moving queue. They fast-track the investigation because millions of dollars of untaxed revenue are at stake. It was 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I was sitting safely in my corporate office miles away from the logistics company headquarters, but I knew exactly how the delivery protocol worked. A federal mail carrier walked through the double-glass doors of the logistics firm. He bypassed the normal mail bins and approached the receptionist directly. He held a thick certified envelope that required a direct signature from the primary business owners. The return address bore the bold, unmistakable seal of the Department of the Treasury. Terrence was called to the front desk. He signed for the package with a careless flick of his pen. He walked back into the private executive office he shared with Andre and tossed the heavy envelope onto the center of their glass meeting table. They looked at the IRS seal. Because their egos were so massive and their financial literacy was so incredibly low, they did not feel a single ounce of panic. Terrence let out a scoffing laugh. He genuinely assumed that I was just being a petty, bitter ex-wife. He thought I had called the IRS to report a minor discrepancy on our joint marital tax returns, just to cause him a brief administrative headache. Andre leaned back in his chair and smirked, telling Terrence to just hand it off to their cheap budget accountant to make it go away. They thought they were untouchable, They thought their money and their status insulated them from any real consequences. They arrogantly brushed the envelope aside, turning their attention back to planning their weekend golf trips and authorizing another fraudulent wire transfer to Brittany's offshore shell company. They left the certified letter sitting unopened on the desk. They had absolutely no idea that the federal government does not send certified urgent mail for petty marital disputes. They did not know that at that exact moment, a federal freeze was quietly moving through the banking system, locking down every single corporate and personal account attached to their names. Exactly 24 hours after the mail carrier delivered that certified letter, the federal banking freeze took full and absolute effect. In the logistics industry, liquid cash flow is oxygen. You cannot operate a fleet of delivery trucks without immediate access to capital. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the corporate fuel cards began declining at commercial pumps across the state. By 10 o'clock, the automated payroll processing system rejected the weekly direct deposits for their entire staff. By 11 o'clock, the commercial branch manager of their primary bank made a highly urgent phone call to the executive office. He informed Terrence and Andre that the Department of the Treasury had placed a hard lock on every single routing number associated with their corporate tax identification number. The willful ignorance they displayed the previous afternoon evaporated in an instant. The unopened envelope sitting on their glass meeting table suddenly transformed from a petty annoyance into a ticking time bomb. When they finally tore it open and read the official notice of a comprehensive federal audit and asset freeze, reality crashed down on them with crushing weight. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a client file when I heard the screech of tires pulling into my driveway. A car door slammed shut with aggressive force. I did not hear the heavy, arrogant footsteps that had marched through my hardwood hallway earlier that week. Instead, I heard the frantic, clumsy fumbling of keys, followed by the frantic sound of someone practically running toward my office door. Terrence burst into the room. The contrast between the man standing in front of me now and the man who had laughed in my face at the bullpen was staggering. The arrogance was completely gone. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, and he was visibly sweating through the collar of his expensive dress shirt. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, his eyes wide with unadulterated panic. "Zuri," he gasped, gripping the doorframe to steady himself. "Zuri, you have to stop this. You have to call them back right now." I did not stand up. I did not offer him a glass of water or a comforting word. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched him unravel. "Call who back, Terrence?" I asked, my voice a flat, emotionless void. "The IRS, Zuri." He stepped forward, his hands shaking as he gestured wildly in the air. "They froze everything, the bank accounts, the fuel cards, the vendor lines of credit. Everything is locked. We cannot even process payroll today. The dispatchers are panicking. You have to call the whistleblower hotline and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you were just angry and acting out of spite." He moved closer to my desk, his posture crumbling as he leaned over the mahogany surface. He was no longer trying to look imposing. He was begging. "I know you know about Miami." He pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate whisper. "I know you found out about the girl in the hotel suite. I am sorry, okay? I am so incredibly sorry. It meant nothing to me. It was just a stupid mistake. But you cannot destroy my entire company over $15,000. I will pay the money back to the corporate account out of my own pocket. I will withdraw my threats about custody. Just please withdraw the divorce petition and call the federal agents off. If we do not get those accounts unfrozen by Monday, the entire business goes under. We will lose all our major shipping contracts." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of his narcissism. He truly believed that this entire federal investigation revolved entirely around him. He thought his little luxury vacation and his 24-year-old mistress were the most important secrets in the world. He assumed that because I had filed for divorce, I had pettily reported his specific fraudulent expense reports just to cause him a brief headache. I was so completely absorbed in his own ego that he could not fathom a scenario where he was not the main character of the disaster. "You walked into this very office 3 days ago, Terrence," I said, keeping my tone dangerously even. "You stood right there next to your brother and your mother, and you threatened to take Malik and Aliyah away from me. You looked me in the eye and promised to drag me through family court until I was living in a cardboard box. You allowed your sister-in-law to smear my name across the internet, calling me a violent, unhinged animal. I did not mean it, Zuri, he stammered, wiping the sweat from his forehead. It was just talk. My mom was pressuring me, and Andre was pushing me to secure the equity. I would never actually take the kids from you. You are a great mother. Please, you have to think about our family. Think about the kids' future. If the logistics company goes bankrupt, I will have nothing left to give them. I let out a slow, measured breath. Do not you dare use my children as a human shield to protect yourself from the consequences of your own actions. You did not care about their future when you drained $45,000 out of our joint checking account and handed it to Beatrice just to punish me. You did not care about their future when you were buying diamond bracelets for a girl who is barely old enough to rent a car. Terrence dropped to his knees. A grown man, a self-proclaimed high society executive, actually fell to his knees on the rug of my home office. Zuri, please. I am begging you. I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever you want. Just fix the tax issue. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to talk to these people. Tell them it was a marital misunderstanding. I looked down at the man I had spent a decade building a life with. There was no pity left in my heart. There was no residual affection to soften the blow. There was only the cold, hard truth of mathematics and digital evidence. You think the federal government initiated an immediate hard freeze on your corporate accounts over a few luxury cabanas and a cheap mistress in South Beach? I asked, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. The Internal Revenue Service does not execute an emergency asset lockdown for petty marital expense fraud, Terrence. You are thinking entirely too small. He stared up at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice trembling. It was just the Miami trip. That is all I expensed. I swear to you, Zuri, that is the only thing I took. I reached forward and opened my laptop. I woke up the screen and launched my secure encrypted dossier. I grabbed the television remote from my desk drawer and turned on the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall of my office. I used that screen when I needed to review massive, complicated datasets for my corporate clients. Today, I was going to use it to perform an execution. I connected my laptop to the wall monitor. The large screen flickered and then illuminated the room with the harsh, bright light of a massive financial spreadsheet. Get off the floor, Terrence, I commanded, pointing to the leather guest chair across from my desk. Stand up, sit in that chair, and look at the screen. You are about to see exactly what kind of business you are actually running. Terrence slowly pushed himself off the rug. The physical exertion seemed to take a massive toll on him, as if the gravity in my home office had suddenly doubled. He walked over to the leather guest chair and collapsed into it. His eyes were fixed on the large flat-screen monitor mounted on my wall. The bright white background of the financial spreadsheet illuminated his sweating face, highlighting every line of panic and confusion etched into his features. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm clinical detachment of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. Look at the screen, Terrence, I said, tapping a key on my laptop to highlight a specific column of data. You and Andre run a regional logistics firm. Your primary overhead consists of vehicle maintenance, commercial fuel contracts, warehouse leasing, and payroll. You have authorized vendors for all of these operational costs. I know this because I built your original business plan 10 years ago. Terrence nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the numbers. Right, he muttered. We use local mechanics. We have a regional contract for diesel. I tapped another key, and a secondary spreadsheet overlaid the first. Then please explain to me why your company has been wiring massive amounts of cash on the 15th of every single month to a vendor called Sterling Consulting Partners. Terrence squinted at the screen. The confusion on his face was entirely genuine. I have never heard of them, he said, his voice raspy. Who are they? Are they a subcontractor? They are a phantom vendor, Terrence, I explained, leaning forward and resting my elbows on my desk. They do not exist. They do not provide fleet optimization services. They do not provide strategic route management. They do not provide anything except a black hole for your corporate revenue. I brought up the digital copies of the invoices on the monitor. Look at these documents. The formatting is completely amateur. The service descriptions are just meaningless copied and pasted industry jargon. There are no project milestones and no hourly breakdowns. Yet over the past 24 months, your company has paid this single vendor exactly $1,240,000. The color completely drained from Terrence's face. His mouth dropped open as his brain struggled to process the astronomical number. Over $1 million, he gasped. That is impossible, Tsuri. Andre handles all the accounts payable. He signs off on every single vendor contract. He would never authorize something like this without running it past me. I clicked my mouse, opening the digital authorization logs. I highlighted the electronic signatures attached to every single wire transfer. Andre did not just authorize them, Terrence. I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He orchestrated them. Your brother approved every single fraudulent payment for the last 2 years. Terrence shook his head violently, refusing to accept the reality staring him right in the face. No, he protested, gripping the armrests of the leather chair. No, you are wrong. Andre is my blood. We built this legacy together. He would never steal from me. This has to be a mistake. Maybe it is a legitimate consulting firm that Mom hired to help us expand. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It is truly remarkable how fiercely you will defend the people who are actively destroying you. You want to know who owns Sterling Consulting Partners. You want to know who is sitting on over $1 million of your hard-earned revenue. I switched the display on the monitor, bringing up the Federal Corporate Registry database. I showed him the incorporation documents for the offshore limited liability company registered in Delaware. I zoomed in on the designated registered agent. The text filled the entire screen in bold, undeniable black letters. Brittany Sterling. Terrence stopped breathing. The silence in my home office became absolute. He stared at his sister-in-law's maiden name displayed on the federal document. His eyes darted from the name to the offshore routing numbers and back to the name again. The psychological impact of the revelation hit him so hard, his entire body physically recoiled into the back of the chair. Your perfect white sister-in-law, Terrence, I said, twisting the knife with absolute precision. The woman your mother worships as the pinnacle of high society grace. The woman who slapped my hand at my own anniversary dinner because she felt entitled to disrespect me. She and your brother have been systematically bleeding your company dry. Terrence raised a trembling hand to his mouth. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire house burn to the ground. Think about the profound irony. Terrence, I continued, refusing to let him look away from the screen. Your mother constantly degraded me. She told me I was nothing without your family. She treated Brittany like royalty because Brittany fit her toxic classist aesthetic. But I was the one who funded your startup with my savings. And Brittany was the one robbing you blind. He let out a choked, ragged sound. It was the sound of a massive, fragile ego shattering into a million irreparable pieces. You were so desperate to be the big man, Terrence, I said, my voice laced with absolute disgust. You were so desperate to project wealth and power that you never even bothered to read your own financial ledgers. You let your brother handle the accounts because you were too busy taking a 24-year-old girl to Miami and expensing your infidelity to a company card. You thought you were so clever hiding $15,000 in fake client entertainment charges. You thought you were the mastermind. I paused, letting the crushing weight of his own stupidity settle over him. You risked your marriage, your children, and your freedom for $15,000, while the brother you trusted was stealing $1.2 million right out of your pocket. You were a pawn, Terrence. You were an easy, distracted mark. Terrence buried his face in his hands. A raw, guttural sob escaped his throat. The federal asset freeze suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense to him. He finally understood that the Internal Revenue Service did not care about his luxury cabana or his cheap mistress. They cared about the massive, coordinated offshore wire fraud operation being run directly through his business. I am going to federal prison. He wept, his voice muffled by his hands. They are going to take everything, the house, the cars, the business. We are going to lose it all. You already lost it all, Terrence, I said quietly. You lost it the moment you decided to let your family disrespect the only person who actually had your back. You allowed them to treat me like garbage, and you participated in the abuse because it made you feel powerful. Now you get to experience what real power actually looks like. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. Zuri, you have to help me, he begged, his voice cracking. You are a forensic auditor. You know how these federal investigations work. You can explain the digital footprint to them. You can prove that I did not know about the offshore accounts. You can show them that Andre and Brittany acted alone. Please, Zuri, I am the father of your children. You cannot let me go to prison for something my brother did. I looked at him completely unmoved by his tears. I have already provided the federal agents with the complete digital footprint, Terrence. I gave them the unedited server logs proving Andre authorized the transfers. I gave them the incorporation documents linking the offshore accounts to Brittany. Relief flashed across his face for a brief fleeting second. So they know I was not involved, he asked desperately. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my desk. Oh, they know you were not involved in the $1 million embezzlement, Terrence. But I also gave them your unedited corporate expense reports. I gave them the receipts for your luxury oceanfront suite, your poolside cabanas, and the diamond jewelry you bought your mistress. I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that you committed corporate tax fraud. You might not go to prison for the embezzlement, but the federal government is absolutely going to liquidate every single asset you possess to recover the penalties on your tax evasion. Terrence stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He had nothing left to say. Every single lie, every single manipulation, and every single attempt at intimidation had been systematically dismantled by raw, undeniable data. I was a ruined man sitting in the home office of the woman he had completely underestimated. Before the profound silence in the room could settle any further, the heavy thud of multiple car doors slamming shut echoed from the driveway outside. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded up the front walkway. The front door of the house was thrown open with such violent force that I heard the doorknob strike the hallway wall. Terrence turned his head toward the office door, his eyes wide with renewed panic. He knew exactly who was coming. The architects of his destruction had finally arrived to survey the damage. Brittany stared down at the small silver drive resting on the polished mahogany of my desk. Her smug, triumphant smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Andre scoffed, trying to maintain his arrogant posture, but I could see the sudden rigid tension in his shoulders. They genuinely thought a stack of physical papers with a traced signature was the ultimate weapon. They were operating with a 20th century mindset, trying to outsmart a woman who audited 21st century corporate networks for a living. I looked at Andre and let out a soft, humorless laugh. You can forge my physical signature on 100 different authorization forms, Andre, I said, leaning forward. You can print them on company letterhead and backdate them all you want. But in a federal financial investigation paper means absolutely nothing without the digital metadata to back it up. Andre narrowed his eyes, taking a step toward my desk. What are you talking about? He demanded. I picked up the drive and held it between my fingers. I am talking about the fact that I still own 30% of your logistics company. And as a primary shareholder, I am exercising my legal right to call a mandatory emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp at the corporate headquarters. You, Terrence, Brittany, and Beatrice will all be there. If any of you fail to show up, I will hand this drive directly to the federal auditors currently freezing your accounts. Terrence looked like he was going to be physically sick. Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but the absolute certainty in my voice silenced her. I pointed toward the door of my office. I will see all of you tomorrow morning. Now get out of my house. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the logistics company headquarters was thick with suffocating dread. The usual bustling energy of the dispatchers and account managers had been replaced by nervous whispering. The federal asset freeze had paralyzed the daily operations, and every employee knew the company was standing on the edge of a cliff. I bypassed the bullpen entirely and walked directly into the main executive boardroom. They were already waiting for me. They sat around the massive glass conference table, looking like prisoners waiting for a tribunal. Beatrice sat at the far end, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pinched with sour indignation. She was still desperately trying to hold on to her high society matriarch persona, even as the walls closed in around her. Terrence sat to her left, staring blankly at his empty hands. He looked utterly defeated, stripped of the expensive suits and loud bragging that usually defined his entire personality. Andre and Brittany sat together on the right side of the table. Brittany had conveniently decided not to wear her medical prop neck brace today. Without her social media audience to perform for, she had dropped the fragile victim act entirely. She glared at me, her eyes cold and calculating. Andre sat rigidly beside her, a thick manila folder resting on the table in front of him. He tapped his fingers against the glass, clearly waiting for the opportunity to use his forged documents to leverage his way out of a federal indictment. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. I set my laptop on the glass surface and connected the primary cable to the large overhead projector mounted on the boardroom wall. "Let us get straight to the point," I announced, my voice commanding the silent room. "You are currently facing a multi-million-dollar federal investigation. You came into my home yesterday and threatened to hand forged authorization documents to the federal government in an attempt to frame me for your embezzlement scheme." Andre pushed his folder forward, sliding it into the center of the table. "They are not forgeries, Zuri," he stated, his voice laced with desperate bravado. "Your signature is right there on the dotted line. You approved the vendor contracts for Sterling Consulting Partners. If we go down, you are going down with us. You might as well use your auditing skills to clear the ledgers right now, or we hand these over." I did not even look at his folder. I tapped a key on my laptop, and the overhead projector hummed to life. The massive screen illuminated the darkened boardroom, casting a harsh white light over their faces. "I am not going to clear the ledgers, Andre," I said, turning my attention to the screen. "I am going to show you exactly what I already gave to the federal investigators." I opened the first encrypted file. A highly detailed, complex data log filled the screen. Line after line of digital code, timestamps, and numeric identifiers scrolled past. "When you authorize a financial transfer in a modern corporate banking system," I explained, pacing slowly at the head of the table, "the server does not just look at a scanned signature. It creates an unalterable digital handshake. It records the exact time, the exact user profile, and most importantly, the exact Internet Protocol address of the computer initiating the wire transfer." I clicked my mouse, highlighting a specific column of numbers in bright yellow. "These are the Internet Protocol addresses logged for every single one of the wire transfers sent to Sterling Consulting Partners over the last 2 years," I said, pointing to the screen. "I ran a geographic trace on these addresses. They do not trace back to my home office. They do not trace back to my corporate firm." I clicked again, and a high-resolution satellite map appeared on the screen, with a bright red pin dropped directly over a specific residential neighborhood. "They trace directly to the private secure wireless network located inside your luxury home, Andre." The color drained instantly from Andre's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I was not finished. I brought up a secondary data log. Furthermore, I pulled the device registry data. The server records the unique media access control address of the physical hardware used to log in. I cross-referenced the hardware identifiers. The computer that approved the theft of $1.2 million from this logistics company was a personalized laptop registered to Brittany. Brittany flinched as if I had physically struck her. The arrogant glare vanished from her eyes, completely replaced by stark, naked terror. "You sat in your expensive living room, Brittany," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You logged into the company server using your husband's credentials, and you wired hundreds of thousands of dollars to an offshore shell company registered in your own maiden name. You left a digital footprint so wide and so obvious that a first-year accounting student could have tracked it. Your forged pieces of paper mean absolutely nothing against raw back-end server data." Beatrice gasped, clutching the edge of the table. She looked from the screen to Brittany and then to Andre. Her perfectly constructed reality was imploding. The white daughter-in-law she had paraded around Atlanta, the woman she had held up as the standard of grace and refinement, was a common thief who had destroyed her family's wealth. "You stole from us," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with shock. "You stole from your own family." Andre tried to stand up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "We were just moving assets to protect them from taxes," he stammered, looking frantically at his mother. "We were going to reinvest the money. It was a strategic corporate maneuver." "It was federal wire fraud, Andre," I corrected him sharply. "And you are not the only one who left a digital trail." I switched the projection to a new file. This time, the screen displayed the corporate expense reports accompanied by the geotagged photographs of Terrence and his 24-year-old mistress in Miami. Terrence buried his head in his hands, letting out a long, broken groan. "While you two were busy embezzling $1 million, I continued, pointing to the new evidence, your brother was busy logging into the corporate system from a luxury cabana in South Beach." The geolocation data on his mobile device perfectly matches the timestamps of the fraudulent expense approvals he submitted to cover up his infidelity. Every single one of you used this company as a personal slush fund. Every single one of you committed massive financial crimes while looking down on me, treating me like a servant who should be grateful for your presence. I closed my laptop. The projector screen went dark, plunging the room back into heavy, suffocating silence. I gave everything to the authorities, I said, looking at the four ruined people sitting around the table. The server logs the offshore accounts, the device registries, and the expense reports. There is no negotiating. There is no covering this up. The federal government has the entire digital map of your destruction. The heavy, suffocating silence hung in the boardroom for what felt like an eternity. I stood at the head of the long glass table, looking down at the four people who had spent the last decade trying to make me feel small. Terrence had his face buried in his hands. Brittany was shaking uncontrollably. Andre stared blankly at the dark projector screen, realizing that his little stack of forged papers was completely useless against the raw back-end data I had just exposed. Beatrice sat frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly as her pristine high society delusion crumbled into dust. Andre was the first to break the silence. His arrogance had been severely damaged, but his desperate need for control pushed him into a blind panic. He slammed his fist onto the glass table, making everyone flinch. He jumped out of his leather chair and pointed a trembling finger at me. "You think you can just walk in here and do this?" he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You think you can just hack into our servers and make up a bunch of digital lies? I am calling corporate security. I am having you arrested for corporate espionage, Zuri. I will hand these physical authorization forms to the police and watch them carry you out of here in handcuffs." He lunged forward, reaching across the table to grab my laptop. He actually believed that if he could physically destroy my computer, the evidence would somehow magically disappear. He thought he could smash the hard drive and save his fraudulent empire. Before his fingers could even graze the edge of my keyboard, the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom swung open. They did not just open normally. They were pulled apart with the kind of authoritative, undeniable force that instantly commands a room. My ruthless divorce attorney Valerie stepped gracefully across the threshold. She was wearing a razor-sharp white suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. She looked like a predator walking into a cage full of cornered mice. But Valerie was not alone. Flanking her on either side were four individuals wearing dark tactical windbreakers. The bright yellow lettering across their jackets stood out vividly against the sterile corporate environment of the boardroom. Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The sight of federal agents standing inside their logistics headquarters hit my husband and his family like a physical shockwave. Andre stopped dead in his tracks, his hands still hovering in the air above my laptop. Terrence slowly lifted his head from his hands, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. Brittany let out a sharp, squeaking gasp, pressing her back hard against her chair, as if she could somehow merge with the upholstery and disappear. Normally, a federal corporate financial audit takes months to execute. The government moves slowly, gathering subpoenas, issuing notices, and carefully building a case. But my family did not understand who they were dealing with. I was not a disgruntled employee making a vague complaint. I am a licensed, certified corporate forensic auditor. When I submitted my whistleblower report, I did not just send a tip. I sent a perfectly packaged, authenticated, and legally binding digital dossier. I provided the exact offshore routing numbers, the phantom vendor incorporation documents, and the internal access logs. Because of my professional credentials, the federal authorities were able to fast-track the investigation, verify the offshore money laundering, and secure emergency warrants in record time. The lead federal agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a serious expression, stepped forward. He bypassed me completely and looked directly at Terrence and Andre. "Terrence and Andre," he stated, his voice booming in the quiet room. "We are securing these premises pursuant to a federal warrant. We are seizing all corporate servers, digital devices, and physical financial records. You are both required to remain on site for immediate questioning regarding multiple allegations of federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement." Andre desperately grabbed his manila folder. He held it up toward the federal agent, his hands shaking violently. "You do not understand," he stammered, his voice pitching higher. "My sister-in-law authorized the payments. I have the signed paperwork right here. She approved the vendors. She is trying to frame us because she is going through a bitter divorce." The lead agent did not even look at the folder. He looked at Andre with a mixture of professional exhaustion and deep pity. "Put the papers down, son," the agent said. "We already have the time-stamped digital metadata from your personal home network. We know exactly where the wire transfers originated." Brittany finally broke. The woman who had proudly posted a viral video mocking me, who had faked a neck injury for internet sympathy, who had stolen over $1 million to fund her lavish lifestyle, completely folded under the pressure. She burst into loud, ugly, hysterical tears. She grabbed Andre's arm, begging him to fix it, crying that she could not go to federal prison because she had a sensitive disposition. Terrence remained frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the federal agents. He realized in that exact moment that his business was gone, his wealth was gone, and his freedom was hanging by a thread, all because he thought he was smart enough to hide his infidelity on a corporate credit card. Amidst the chaos of the federal agents, securing the room and reading the brothers their rights, Beatrice finally snapped. Her entire identity was tied to this logistics company. Her status at her elite social clubs, her arrogant pride, and her ability to look down on people from working-class backgrounds were all funded by the business her sons had allegedly built. Watching federal agents dismantle her empire in real time pushed her over the edge of sanity. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to blame for the absolute destruction of her high society illusion. She zeroed in on me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure raw hatred. "You did this," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the glass walls. "You ruined us. You jealous ghetto embarrassment. You destroyed my family's legacy." Beatrice lunged at me. She threw her entire body weight forward, swinging her arm in a wide, violent arc, aiming to slap me directly across the face. She wanted to recreate the exact moment from my anniversary dinner. She wanted to put me in my place one final time. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, raised my arm, and caught her wrist mid-air. The impact of her arm against my hand made a loud smack, but my grip was absolute iron. I held her wrist suspended between us, stopping her physical assault with effortless strength. Beatrice gasped, her eyes wide with shock as she struggled against my hold. She pulled and twisted, but I did not let go. I let her feel the physical manifestation of my control. For 10 years I had swallowed my pride and taken her emotional abuse. I was never going to let her strike me. "There is no legacy, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of mercy. I shoved her arm away, dropping her wrist in absolute disgust. She stumbled backward, bumping into the conference table to steady herself. "You think you are high society?" I continued, stepping toward her, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You parade around Atlanta acting like you are old money while looking down on me. But I know the truth, Beatrice. I saw your personal finances when Terrence transferred my $45,000 into your account. I saw the massive underwater mortgage on your precious luxury estate. You have been drowning in debt for years trying to keep up appearances." Beatrice shook her head, her eyes darting nervously toward Valerie and the federal agents. "Stop it," she hissed. "Do not you dare speak about my personal affairs." I reached into my leather briefcase. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of legal paper and held it up for her to see. "I bought the distressed debt on your estate." "Beatrice," I stated clearly, letting the words sink into her fragile ego. "Months ago, I used the capital from my private high-yield trust to purchase the note on your property through an anonymous holding company. I am the legal owner of your debt, and because you have been defaulting on your payments for the last 6 months, the holding company executed the foreclosure." I pressed the single sheet of paper directly into her trembling hands. "That is a formal eviction notice," I told her. "The holding company belongs to me. There is no legacy, Beatrice, and there is no house. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your excessive gold jewelry and vacate my property." Beatrice looked down at the eviction notice. The official legal seal stared back at her, confirming her absolute ruin. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching the piece of paper to her chest as she began to hyperventilate. I did not stay to watch them cry. I picked up my laptop, placed it neatly into my briefcase, and walked out of the boardroom alongside my attorney, leaving the federal agents to finish dismantling what was left of my husband's family. Andre's panic morphed into blind, desperate aggression. He lunged across the glass conference table, his hands reaching frantically for my laptop. He genuinely believed that if he could just smash the physical machine, the digital evidence would magically disappear. He thought he could break a piece of hardware and save his fraudulent empire from collapsing. I did not even flinch. I knew he would never reach the keyboard. Before his fingers could graze the edge of my computer, the heavy oak double doors of the executive boardroom flew open. They did not just swing open casually. They were pushed apart with the kind of absolute, undeniable authority that immediately sucks all the air out of a room. My divorce attorney, Valerie, stepped gracefully across the threshold. She was wearing a razor-sharp white suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase, and looking like a predator walking into a cage full of cornered mice. But Valerie was not alone. Flanking her on either side were 4 individuals wearing dark tactical windbreakers. The bright yellow lettering printed across their jackets stood out vividly against the sterile corporate environment of the boardroom. Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The sight of federal agents standing inside their logistics headquarters hit my husband and his family like a physical shockwave. Andre stopped dead in his tracks, his arms still suspended awkwardly over the glass table. Terrence slowly lifted his head from his hands, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. Brittany let out a sharp, squeaking gasp, pressing her back hard against her leather chair, as if she could somehow melt into the upholstery and disappear completely. Normally, a federal corporate financial audit takes months to execute. The government moves slowly, gathering subpoenas, issuing notices, and carefully building a case layer by layer. But my husband and his family did not understand who they were dealing with. I was not a disgruntled employee making a vague emotional complaint on a phone call. I am a licensed certified corporate forensic auditor. When I submitted my whistleblower report, I did not just send a tip. I sent a perfectly packaged, authenticated, and legally binding digital dossier. I provided the exact offshore routing numbers, the phantom vendor incorporation documents, and the internal administrative access logs. Because of my professional credentials, the federal authorities were able to fast-track the entire investigation. They verified the offshore money laundering overnight, and a federal judge signed the emergency seizure warrants before breakfast. The lead federal agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely stoic expression, stepped forward. He bypassed me completely and looked directly at Terrence and Andre. "Terrence and Andre," he stated, his voice booming in the quiet room. "We are securing these premises pursuant to a federal warrant. We are seizing all corporate servers, digital devices, and physical financial records. You are both required to remain on site for immediate questioning regarding multiple allegations of federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement." Andre desperately grabbed his manila folder from the table. He held it up toward the federal agent, his hands shaking violently. "You do not understand," he stammered, his voice pitching higher in panic. "My sister-in-law authorized the payments. I have the signed paperwork right here. She approved the vendors. She is trying to frame us because she is going through a bitter divorce." The lead agent did not even look at the folder. He looked at Andre with a mixture of professional exhaustion and deep pity. "Put the papers down, son," the agent said. "We already have the time-stamped digital metadata from your personal home network. We know exactly where the wire transfers originated." Brittany finally broke. The woman who had proudly posted a viral video mocking me, who had faked a neck injury for internet sympathy, who had stolen over $1 million to fund her lavish lifestyle, completely folded under the pressure. She burst into loud, ugly, hysterical tears. She grabbed Andre's arm, begging him to fix it, crying that she could not go to federal prison because she had a sensitive disposition. Her fake high society etiquette dissolved into pathetic, terrified sobbing. Terrence remained frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the federal agents. He realized in that exact moment that his business was gone, his wealth was gone, and his freedom was hanging by a thread, all because he thought he was smart enough to hide his infidelity on a corporate credit card. Amidst the chaos of the federal agents, securing the room and reading the brothers their rights, Beatrice finally snapped. Her entire identity was tied to this logistics company. Her status at her elite social clubs, her arrogant pride, and her ability to look down on people from working-class backgrounds were all funded by the business her sons had supposedly built. Watching federal agents dismantle her empire in real time pushed her over the edge of sanity. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to blame for the absolute destruction of her high society illusion. She zeroed in on me, her face contorted into a mask of pure raw hatred. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the glass walls. "You ruined us. You jealous ghetto embarrassment. You destroyed my family's legacy." Beatrice lunged at me. She threw her entire body weight forward, swinging her arm in a wide, violent arc, aiming to slap me directly across the face. She wanted to recreate the exact moment from my anniversary dinner. She wanted to put me in my place one final time to assert her dominance over the dark-skinned daughter-in-law she had always despised. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, raised my arm, and caught her wrist mid-air. The impact of her arm against my hand made a loud smack, but my grip was absolute iron. I held her wrist, suspended between us, stopping her physical assault with effortless strength. Beatrice gasped, her eyes wide with shock as she struggled against my hold. She pulled and twisted, but I did not let go. I let her feel the physical manifestation of my control. For 10 years I had swallowed my pride and taken her emotional abuse. I was never going to let her strike me. "There is no legacy, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of mercy. I shoved her arm away, dropping her wrist in absolute disgust. She stumbled backward, bumping into the conference table to steady herself, rubbing her arm where my fingers had clamped down. "You think you are high society?" I continued, stepping toward her, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You parrot around Atlanta acting like you are old money while looking down on me. But I know the truth, Beatrice. I saw your personal finances when Terrence transferred my $45,000 into your checking account. I saw the massive underwater mortgage on your precious luxury estate. You have been drowning in debt for years, trying to keep up appearances, relying on your sons to bail you out." Beatrice shook her head, her eyes darting nervously toward Valerie and the federal agents who were now watching our exchange. "Stop it," she hissed. "Do not you dare speak about my personal affairs in public." I reached into my leather briefcase. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of legal paper and held it up for her to see. "I bought the distressed debt on your estate." "Beatrice," I stated clearly, letting the words sink into her fragile ego. "Months ago, I used the capital from my private high-yield trust to purchase the promissory note on your property through an anonymous holding company. I am the legal owner of your debt, and because you have been defaulting on your payments for the last 6 months, my holding company officially executed the foreclosure." I stepped forward and pressed the single sheet of paper directly into her trembling hands. "That is a formal eviction notice," I told her, my voice echoing in the silent room. "The holding company belongs to me. There is no legacy, Beatrice, and there is no house. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your excessive gold jewelry and vacate my property." Beatrice looked down at the eviction notice. The official legal seal stared back at her, confirming her absolute ruin. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching the piece of paper to her chest as she began to hyperventilate. I did not stay to watch them cry. I calmly closed my laptop, disconnected the projector cable, and placed my computer neatly into my briefcase. I turned around and walked out of the boardroom alongside my attorney, leaving my husband and his toxic family to the federal agents. I walked out of that building for the last time, finally breathing the clean air of my own freedom. 6 months can feel like an absolute eternity when you are waiting for justice, but it moves like lightning when the federal government is dismantling your life. Fast forward exactly half a year from the day those tactical windbreakers walked into the executive boardroom, and the landscape of my former family had been rendered completely unrecognizable. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly fine, and they did not leave a single stone unturned. Let us start with the masterminds of the phantom vendor scheme. Brittany and Andre are currently facing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. It turns out that federal prosecutors do not care about high society etiquette or viral social media videos. Faced with the terrifying reality of spending the next decade in a federal penitentiary, their supposedly perfect united marriage dissolved in a matter of seconds. The exact moment the prosecuting attorney offered a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation, Brittany and Andre violently scrambled over each other to take the plea deal. They spent days in separate interrogation rooms, eagerly handing over every last piece of evidence they had on each other just to save their own skins. The unyielding family loyalty they so proudly projected at my anniversary dinner evaporated the second they realized nobody was coming to rescue them. They are now officially divorced, completely bankrupt, and awaiting their final sentencing hearings. They are restricted by federal travel bans and legally barred from speaking to one another. Then there is my ex-husband. Terrence honestly believed his biggest problem was going to be fighting me in family court. He was entirely unprepared for the crushing weight of the Internal Revenue Service. The federal government mercilessly liquidated the entire logistics company to cover the astronomical penalties accrued from his blatant corporate tax evasion. Every single asset was seized and sold at federal auction. The delivery trucks, the warehouse leases, the commercial contracts, and the bank accounts were all wiped clean. The custom-tailored suits and luxury vehicles Terrence used to project his fake wealth were immediately repossessed. Stripped of his company and his fake status, he was forced to declare absolute personal bankruptcy. Today, the man who used to strut through a corporate bullpen, bragging about expensive golf tournaments, wakes up at 4 in the morning to work a grueling minimum wage job. He drives a forklift in a massive, sweltering commercial distribution warehouse. The profound poetic justice of him doing exhausting manual labor in the exact same logistics industry he used to arrogantly claim he ruled is certainly not lost on me. He does not even get to keep the meager money he earns. His wages are heavily garnished by the state. Every single Friday, the government automatically deducts his court-ordered child support for Malik and Aaliyah and deposits it directly into my private account before Terrence even sees a dime. Whatever pennies remain go straight to the IRS to pay off his massive restitution debt. And finally, there is Beatrice. The formal eviction notice I handed her in that boardroom was executed with absolute ruthless precision. She had exactly 30 days to pack up her excessive gold jewelry, her designer clothes, and her massive ego and vacate my property. Without her sons to illegally fund her extravagant lifestyle, she was entirely cut off from the elite social clubs and high society circles she worshipped. Her wealthy country club friends abandoned her the exact second the federal indictments hit the local Atlanta news networks. They blocked her phone number and pretended they had never even met her. Today, Beatrice lives in a cramped, noisy 2-bedroom rental apartment on the far industrial outskirts of the city. There are no crystal chandeliers, no private dining rooms, and no catering staff. The pristine quiet of her former luxury estate has been replaced by the constant rattling of thin walls and cheap windows. She spends her days sitting in a tiny, poorly lit living room, listening to the heavy commercial trucks rolling down the nearby interstate highway. It is a permanent, deafening reminder of how far she has fallen. Her high society status has completely evaporated, leaving her with nothing but the bitter reality that she destroyed her own family just to protect her foolish pride. While Beatrice sits in her cramped apartment listening to the deafening roar of highway traffic, I sit on the expansive wrap-around porch of my beautiful new home. I purchased this property entirely in cash, using the returns from my private high-yield trust and the extremely generous divorce settlement my attorney Valerie ruthlessly negotiated. There is no highway noise here. There are no frantic phone calls from creditors and no federal agents knocking on the door. The only sounds are the gentle rustling of the old oak trees and the bright, joyful laughter of my children. Malik and Alia are playing a game of tag in the spacious front yard. I watch them run back and forth, completely unburdened and entirely insulated from the toxic dynamic I finally managed to sever. For years, I stayed in that marriage because I thought keeping a unified family structure was the best thing for my children. I convinced myself that tolerating the microaggressions and the blatant disrespect was a necessary sacrifice for their stability. I was completely wrong. Leaving that toxic environment was the greatest gift I could have ever given them. They no longer have to grow up watching their mother be belittled and diminished. They do not have to learn that familial love means quietly accepting abuse. They are safe, secure, and thriving in an environment built on actual respect rather than fake high society posturing. I take a slow sip of my red wine and watch the vibrant colors of the Atlanta sunset paint the evening sky. I let the absolute tranquility of the moment wash over me. I sit back in my comfortable chair and deeply reflect on how for 10 long years I was conditioned and expected to swallow blatant disrespect simply to keep the peace. I was told to shrink my intelligence to hide my financial success and to endure daily insults from people who secretly viewed me as entirely beneath them. They looked at my dark skin and my working class background and decided I was only valuable as a silent financial provider for their unearned luxury. They wanted my money, but they despised my presence. Terrence wanted a submissive, obedient wife who would blindly fund his delusions of grandeur while he chased 24-year-old girls across state lines. Andre and Brittany wanted a convenient, oblivious scapegoat for their massive corporate embezzlement scheme. Beatrice wanted a permanent punching bag to make her feel like an elite, untouchable matriarch. They all vastly underestimated the quiet corporate accountant who built their foundation from the ground up. They fatally mistook my professional restraint for personal weakness. They did not realize that the meticulous patience required to trace millions of dollars in hidden corporate assets is the exact same patience required to systematically dismantle an abusive family. Today, my career has never been stronger. My corporate firm recently promoted me to managing director. The senior partners rewarded my impeccable work ethic and my flawless audit reports with a highly lucrative equity stake in the agency. I no longer hide my success or minimize my professional achievements to protect the fragile egos of incompetent men. I do not apologize for my brilliance or my financial independence. I walk into corporate boardrooms fully aware of my own immense power, and I command the respect I have rightfully earned. The wine tastes perfectly sweet tonight. I watch the sun dip below the tree line, casting long, beautiful shadows across the manicured grass of my own property. I think about the night of my 10th anniversary dinner. I think about the sharp sting of Brittany slapping my hand across the seafood tower. I think about her sneering at me and telling me I needed to learn my place in the family hierarchy. I think about Beatrice echoing that exact same sentiment, demanding my total unyielding submission. I think about Terrence looking down at his phone, too cowardly to defend his own wife. They were so incredibly desperate to enforce a social hierarchy that never actually existed. They spent years trying to push me down so they could stand on my shoulders and pretend they were giants. They wanted me to remember my place in their world, so I did. My place is at the absolute top, and theirs is exactly wherever I allow them to be. The most profound lesson from this ordeal is that you should never shrink yourself to accommodate people who refuse to respect your worth. For years, I allowed my toxic in-laws to treat me like a subordinate while I secretly funded their entire lifestyle. I believed that compromising my dignity was the price of keeping the peace. But true power comes from recognizing your own value and establishing unbreakable boundaries. When they mistook my professional restraint for personal weakness, they engineered their own downfall. Ultimately, complete financial independence and silent preparation are your absolute greatest weapons against manipulation and familial abuse. If you have ever had to establish firm boundaries with toxic relatives to protect your peace, please share your experiences in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of resilience.